Chapter 49-39. The manager was stunned and asked, "Then why did you quit?" Sumu thought for a moment and said, "I want to go back to school. Cymbidium chinense. They're helping to take care of it. I've thought about it and I want to continue studying." The manager nodded understandingly. "That's true. It's good to study more. You're still young and smart. It's a waste to stay here forever. You have to seize the opportunity. Don't be so stupid, okay?" Sumu smiled. "Thank you, Sister Chin." The manager was a nice person and smiled again. "When you earn money in the future, come and take care of our business. I'll give you a discount." Sumu agreed and the two of them worked together. Actually, Sumu quite liked her work here. It was busy and fulfilling and the manager treated her well. She was a little reluctant to leave. She also knew that others were talking about her behind her back, talking about her relationship with the Yi family. She didn't explain. She didn't need to explain anything to others. She was responsible for her own life. If others couldn't bear it for her, she didn't need to explain it to others. Just like that, in the afternoon, she received a call from the nursery at around 1 o'clock. The voice on the other side was rather anxious. "Is it the mother of Cymbidium chinense? I'm a teacher at Cymbidium chinense. Cymbidium chinense just had a conflict with a child and broke his head. Hurry up and come and deal with it." The teacher's voice was a little low. "The child's mother isn't easy to deal with. So, just lower your attitude later and make it a small matter. If this matter is exposed, it won't be good for our nursery." Sumu felt that her attitude was ambiguous but she was very worried about Cymbidium chinense. So, she didn't care and asked for leave. She also felt bad. After all, this was her last day of work and something like that had happened. The manager was very reasonable and pushed her. "Hurry up and go. Don't let the child wait too long. He must be very scared now." Sumu immediately went over. He didn't even change out of his uniform. Usually, he couldn't bear to take a taxi, but this time, he directly flagged down a taxi to go to the nursery. 20 minutes later, the car arrived at the nursery. A young female teacher was already waiting for Sumu. When she saw Sumu get out of the car, she said, "It's like this, Cymbidium chinense mother. The other party's child is called Wu Xiaolei. He's quite good with the Cymbidium chinense, but for some reason, the Cymbidium chinense suddenly got into a fight with him today. By the time we got there, the other party's child's head was injured. His mother is difficult to deal with, so you." Sumu looked at the young teacher and asked softly, "Is Cymbidium chinense all right?" The teacher was stunned for a moment before saying, "Cymbidium chinense is fine. It's just that she's in a bad mood. Kids are always like that after a fight." Sumu's steps were a little hurried. "Then how did they start fighting?" The female teacher's expression was a little thought-provoking as she looked straight at Sumu. Sumu made eye contact with her and had probably guessed it as well. She felt a pain in her heart, not for herself, but for the Cymbidium chinense. Because of that, the Cymbidium chinense was often bullied in the nursery. In fact, the Cymbidium chinense had told her once, but she didn't take it to heart. Instead, she comforted the Cymbidium chinense and asked him to endure it. She had always thought that she could take care of the Cymbidium chinense well, but that might not be the case. Sumu suddenly stopped in her tracks. She took out her phone and dialed a number with slightly trembling fingers. It was Yi Xiangnan's phone. On the other side, Yi Xiangnan was in a meeting. Suddenly, the phone on the table rang. Chapter 49-40. Memorize. On the other side, Yi Xiangnan was in a meeting. Suddenly, the phone on the table rang. He frowned and looked down. It was a call from Sumu. Just as he was stunned for a moment, the secretary beside him reminded him of a question that had just been asked by a senior executive. Yi Xiangnan raised his hand and said, "Vice President Li, you continue to preside over the meeting. I'll take a call and may go out for a while." Answer a phone call. They want Vice President Li to preside over it. Why couldn't anyone understand what was going on? But their CEO Yi had already walked out. In the corridor, he asked Sumu what's the matter. It's Cymbidium chinense. It broke a classmate's head a little at school. Sumu's voice was a little hoarse. Yi Xiangnan immediately asked, "What about Cymbidium chinense? Is he alright?" "I haven't seen him yet. Their teacher said he's fine." Sumu's voice trembled slightly. Yi Xiangnan quickly made a decision. "You go take a look at the Cymbidium chinense first. I'll be right there." Pausing for a moment, he continued, "I'll handle this personally. Don't get into a conflict." As he spoke, he hung up the phone, brought a secretary with him, and drove the car himself. On the other hand, Sumu followed the female teacher to the nursery's infirmary. The child's parents were already there. The jewelry she was wearing made the simple and clean space look shabby, not to mention Sumu's work clothes. The principal of the nursery came in person and kept comforting the rich lady, "I'm really sorry. It was just a quarrel between the children. The children have already reconciled. Do you think we can forget about this matter? We can just ask the parents of the Cymbidium chinense to pay for the medical expenses and apologize. The two children still have to get along in the future, right?" When Sumu came in, the director nodded politely, but he was obviously not as warm as he was to a rich lady. Sumu could understand this. After all, she had already experienced the fickleness of human nature over the years. Family members were already like that, let alone outsiders. She quietly apologized to the slightly plump woman and said that she would pay for the medical expenses herself. The director also said that it would be settled peacefully. That woman squinted at Sumu and looked her up and down with her shrewd eyes. Then, she snorted disdainfully, "You're quite humble. Maybe people at your level are all like this, Mother Yi. You pretend to be pitiful but do evil things behind your back. There are too many people like you. One is another." Sumu said coldly, "What kind of person I am, it's not up to others to make irresponsible remarks." That woman laughed a little exaggeratedly and said to the director and the teacher of the Cymbidium chinense, "Look, she still has the cheek to refute. She got pregnant before marriage and she doesn't have a husband. The Cymbidium chinense doesn't have a father. So what if my son said a few words of truth? Does that mean that her son can beat someone up? Let me tell you, if your child doesn't kneel down and apologize to my child, I won't let you off. I'll sue you and let everyone see what it means to be shameless. If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked." The more the woman spoke, the more arrogant she became. The director and the teacher looked at each other. Actually, they knew that she was being unreasonable, but the other party was really rich and not someone to be trifled with. When they heard that her father-in-law was a certain something, it became even more difficult to deal with her. The director thought about it again and again. "Teacher Wang, bring the Cymbidium chinense over and apologize. Then, we'll forget about this matter." Chapter 49-41. Updates quickly. She then turned her head and looked at Sumu. "Cymbidium chinense mother, I see that you're not doing well financially. Let's discuss this. Cymbidium chinense will apologize and our nursery will pay for the medical fees. What do you think?" She felt that Sumu should be more practical given his current situation. After all, the medical fees and the examination fees were more than 1,000. She was just a kid, so apologizing was like playing house. She would forget it in a few days. Sumu finally saw the true colors of this nursery. Before she could say anything, Ms. Wang had already brought Cymbidium chinense over. Cymbidium chinense was in a bad mood. He came over and threw himself into Sumu's arms, calling out softly for his mother and apologizing like a kitten. Sumu reached out and touched his little head. "It's okay, Cymbidium chinense." "What happened?" Cymbidium chinense's little face was tense and embarrassed. There were even a lot of tears in his eyes. He bit his lips and said after a long time, "He said that I don't have a father and that I'm a bastard." After saying that, he felt really embarrassed. Sumu's heart ached and she patted him. "How can that be? Didn't Daddy send you to school this morning?" Cymbidium chinense has a father. The woman waited for a long time and couldn't help but snort lightly. "Who are you trying to fool? How can he have a father? Everyone in class is saying that he's a bastard and no one has ever seen his father." The principal and Mr. Wang both looked at Sumu with contempt in their eyes. Sumu stood up straight and said to the woman, "Apologize. Also, I'll pay for your child's medical fees. If you want to sue me or do anything else, apologize to Cymbidium chinense first." The woman seemed to be stabbed by something. She jumped up and her fat body trembled. She pointed at Sumu with a pair of chubby hands. There was a big gold bracelet and 3 large gemstone rings on her hands. "Are you kidding me? Your son hit my son, and you want my son to apologize to your son? Is there anyone as shameless as you? I'm telling you, I'm going to kill you when I get back. I'm going to kill your son so that you won't be able to survive in B City. There won't be a place for your son to study, and no school will dare to accept him. I'm telling you, I'm just that unreasonable." The woman was so angry that her face was distorted. The fat on her face trembled. She couldn't bear to look at her. The principal and Mr. Wang wanted Sumu to compromise. They didn't want to be implicated. Cymbidium chinense, on the other hand, buried its face in its mother's arms. It was still a little scared. But at this moment, a shadow at the door blocked the light. Then, a voice rang out. "Who do you want to kill? Who do you want to kill in B City? I've never known anyone in B City who can kill someone from the Yi family." As soon as he finished speaking, Yi Xiangnan walked in. He had a meeting today. He was dressed in a formal suit. His shirt was as white as snow, and his suit was even more well-ironed. The cufflinks were probably made of diamonds. They sparkled and looked especially nice. The principal was stunned. Mr. Wang was stunned. The bejeweled woman was also stunned. He was too good-looking. Was he a real person? He looked like a statue. He was tall, handsome, and noble. He was even better looking than a male celebrity, and he had a noble temperament. As for what he said, everyone had forgotten. Just when everyone was stunned, Cymbidium chinense cried and threw itself into his arms, calling him Daddy. Daddy, everyone was dumbfounded again. He was Cymbidium chinense's father. And he just said something about the Yi family. Cymbidium chinense also had the surname Yi. This man looked so familiar. Think again. Chapter 49-42. Teacher Wang suddenly realized that this was the CEO of Starlight. This background wasn't the most impressive. Did you know Yi Mulin? He had just retired. Who did he give all his connections to? The new CEO of the Wen family. Who was that? He was Yi Xiangnan's youngest uncle. He loved Yi Xiangnan the most and was also Wen Yuan's younger brother. Teacher Wang's face turned pale. She immediately whispered a few words to the principal. The principal didn't expect that there would be a star of South Africa in a public nursery like theirs. Didn't they say that children from rich families would study in private schools? How did they end up here? Sigh, she was really in trouble. The director wanted to smooth things over, but there was no place for her to speak at this time. Yi Xiannan's secretary was extremely powerful. As soon as she saw the commotion, she smiled and said a few words. With just a few words, she controlled the situation. The director was in a very passive position and had no right to speak at all. Yi Xiannan patted his son in his arms and comforted him in a low voice. "Little boy, how can you cry so easily? What did they say about you? That you don't have a father?" Cymbidium chinense nodded with tears in his eyes. When he looked up, his little face was almost identical to Yi Xiangnan's. Teacher Wang hated herself for being blind. Why didn't she see it before? Yi Xiangnan sneered, "So you hit him?" Cymbidium chinense nodded pitifully again. The rich woman seemed to have caught something on her and shouted, "Did you hear that? He was the one who hit my son first. He was the one who hit me first. Did your son fight back?" Yi Xiangnan interrupted her impatiently. The woman was stunned for a moment. She mumbled, "Anyway, my son was hurt." Yi Xiangnan sneered, "That's because he's useless. He's so weak when he's 50 kilograms tall. If I were his parent, I would be embarrassed to death." Kneel. Who told you that the Yi family has to kneel to others? Do you want me to kneel for you? The people in the garden trembled with fear as they listened. The woman was terrified, but thinking of her father-in-law's high position, she regained her courage in an instant. "Anyway, your child can forget about going to school here. I'll get the Cymbidium chinense expelled. Of course we won't do it here, but before we leave, I want to see who will be fired first," Yi Xiangnan said coldly, then turned his head to look at the secretary and whispered a few words. In just a short while, even the head of the park was trembling in fear. That woman was also on the phone, crying to her father-in-law, asking him to be killed. The principal was helpless. She kept saying nice things to Yi Xiangnan, but Yi Xiangnan ignored her. In the end, she could only beg Su Mu. Su Mu was not a soft-hearted person, so she did not say anything. 2 or 3 minutes later, Secretary Li hung up the phone and said to Yi Xiangnan, "There's a reply. The principal here has to be changed," and she smiled. It was a beautiful smile for a young girl, but there was a trace of cruelty in it. "I heard that the position of that person is not low, but he has been acting like a tyrant for a long time, so we need to check it out." Yi Xiangnan nodded and left with his son in his arms. After a few steps, he turned around and looked at Su Mu. "Why are you still here? Are you staying for dinner?" Su Mu was stunned. "You can leave now." Secretary Li was smart. She immediately came forward and smiled. "It's all settled. It's just a fight between children." She said it so casually, but the head of the park was about to faint. Chapter 49-43. She said it so casually, but the head of the park was about to faint. Yes, it was a fight between children, but she lost her job. There was also a rich lady whose family was probably worse off than her. She would probably be investigated, and the jewelry in her hands would also be confiscated. She hated it so much. She couldn't be low-key, asking people to kneel down for no reason. It attracted the god of plague and caused her to die. The principal was in a daze, and Mr. Wang was not much better. Only the woman did not understand the situation and kept asking questions. The principal waved his hand and said, "The person you've offended isn't an ordinary person. Other than the Wen family, the Qin family is in the limelight in B City. This person is the most favored of the two families. He's the CEO of Stars Entertainment." It was really funny. You still want someone else's child to be your son? How shameless are you? The director did not want to talk anymore. She had to pack up her things. The rich woman was stunned and did not come back to her senses for a long time. Just then, her son asked her, "Mom, isn't Cymbidium chinense going to apologize to me?" The woman came back to her senses and gave him a big slap. "Apologize, apologize. You only know how to cause trouble. Now, if your grandfather is investigated, we will all have nothing to eat." The child thought in his heart, "Didn't you say that you want people to kneel down for you?" On the other side, Sumu followed Yi Xiangnan to the car. To her surprise, Yi Xiangnan let her drive and got into the back seat, holding the Cymbidium chinense in his hand. The secretary tactfully sat in the front passenger seat. The secretary was only 27 or 28 years old. To be able to get to this position, she was very shrewd and knew how to stand on the side. Today, she could see that CEO Yi might not particularly like Miss Su, but he was very protective. There was a kind of relationship where he could bully others and others could not. There was nothing to say about the son of Cymbidium chinense. Wasn't Lin Lu sent abroad because of this son? She still did not give up and said that in fact, the situation was very stable now. Since ancient times, mothers have been respected because of their sons. As long as Su Mu did not make trouble, this Mrs. Yi was still very stable. Look at the appearance of Cymbidium chinense. How successful it was. It was 100% inherited from CEO Yi. Chosen by God. Secretary Li whispered, "CEO Yi, are we going back to the company now?" Yi Xiangnan held his son and said directly, "Go to the hospital." Secretary Li said like a microphone, "Miss Su, go to the hospital." Yi Sun spoke up like a kitten, "Daddy, I'm fine. A fight and nothing's wrong." Yi Xiannan snorted softly, "Let's go take a look." At this time, Xingyuan Hospital had been the Tang family's business. "Miss Su," Secretary Li said. "Oh," Li said. Secretary Li, Xingyuan had always been the property of the Tang clan, and it had a close relationship with the Qin clan. Su Mu knew this. She paused and then remembered, in the evening, "No. Mr. Yi, if you have something to do, I will take Cymbidium chinense there. It's just a checkup. It won't take much time. After that, you can go with me." Yi Xiangnan played it down, "It's just a meal. Don't have too much psychological burden." He was going to take Cymbidium chinense there. In a formal occasion, he should let Cymbidium chinense show his face. Otherwise, just like today, any cat or dog could bully his son. Su Mu did not say anything, but it did not mean that she would go. The car drove to the hospital. Secretary Li helped to find a familiar doctor and disappeared automatically. There was no need for her to be in the middle of a family of 3. Chapter 49-44. Secretary Li was a very smart person. Her boss might be handsome, but he really wasn't her cup of tea. She would just do her job well, suck up to him, earn money, and enjoy her beauty. She wouldn't want to be a mistress or a mistress. What good would that Lin Lu do? She knew CEO Yi well. The relationship between his wife and his woman might be blurred, but with such a son, the woman outside would always be outside and would never be brought to the table. Secretary Li left. Su Mu didn't notice it until later, but she didn't say anything. After checking Cymbidium chinense, it was fortunate that there was nothing wrong with the little guy. When they went out, it was already 5:00 in the afternoon. It was a delicate time, a time for dinner. Su Mu looked at the time and said softly, "Then I'll bring Cymbidium chinense back first. Take the luggage, down, you." She probably meant to let him take Cymbidium chinense away. Little Yi Sun instantly became nervous. His little face tensed up and he didn't say anything. This time, it was Yi Xiangnan who drove. He adjusted his sitting position, then looked at the rearview mirror and said calmly, "Let's go to the wedding banquet first." Sumu said without thinking, "I won't go. It's just by the way, not on purpose." He was very calm, then turned his head and looked at Sumu. Sumu didn't say anything, but Cymbidium chinense in her arms was still a little scared after what happened today. It pulled her clothes, obviously asking her to accompany him. Sumu didn't object anymore. Yi Xiangnan drove to a studio. The car stopped, and Sumu bit her lower lip. It doesn't have to be so grand. Yi Xiangnan glanced at her. "Why, do you want to wear work clothes?" Sumu didn't say anything. Yi Xiangnan unfastened the seatbelt, got out of the car and directly picked up Xiangnan, walking into the luxurious studio. Secretary Li had already made an appointment. As soon as they entered, the manager would receive them in person, and the studio was closed. Yi Xiangnan sat on the sofa, casually flipped through the magazine, and said, "Go buy a children's meal." The manager was stunned, then smiled and asked the shop assistant to buy it. Because of Cymbidium chinense, Sumu should be the rumored Cinderella, so she said with the most professional smile, "Secretary Li said that Mrs. Yi will accompany Mr. Yi to attend a banquet, so we have a suggestion. Everything should be minimalist, so it won't steal the bride's limelight and look simple and elegant. What do you think, Mrs. Yi?" Because of her family background, Sumu couldn't deal with such a professional manager, and she wasn't, so her voice was a little low. "I'm sorry, I'm not what?" Yi Xiangnan interrupted her. Sumu's voice suddenly stopped. Although it was stopped, how could the manager not know what she wanted to say? She was really silly. Mr. Yi brought her here and asked her to attend a wedding banquet of the upper class. His meaning couldn't be more obvious. No, it was also obvious in others' eyes. She didn't mind for the time being. In any case, she had to serve this person well. Thus, she dressed him personally. As for little Yi Sun, it was easy. He was dressed in a commuter suit. This little fellow was especially handsome, and he should be the prettiest child here. And he was super noble. Chapter 49-45. As for Sumu, the manager personally styled her. She made a simple black Chanel skirt with a small V-neck and a pair of high heels of the same color. As for jewelry, she only wore a pair of pearl pendants, which was also from Chanel. Her temperament suddenly became gentle. Yi Xiangnan gave her a handbag. The manager smiled. "Mr. Yi really has a good taste. This is the new 19 from Chanel this year. Many stars are using it. It's especially suitable for Mrs. Yi." She also made a light makeup for Sumu. After that, she pressed Sumu's shoulder. "Mrs. Yi's bone shape is quite good. She is relatively thin. It's better for her to follow the temperament style in the future." After that, she raised her eyes with a bit of flattery. "What do you think, Mr. Yi?" Yi Xiangnan was originally sitting on the sofa and waiting. Cymbidium chinense was eating something beside him. Hearing the manager's words, he raised his eyes. "Mom is so beautiful." Yi Xiangnan got up and walked over to have a look. He smiled slightly. "I can still look at her." The manager was a bit weird. But thinking about it, Mr. Yi was born in an entertainment company. He had seen many beauties. Mrs. Ye's appearance was indeed ordinary, but, the manager repeatedly emphasized, "But Mrs. Ye's temperament is really good. It's very suitable for her." Yi Xiangnan smiled and didn't say anything else. Sumu also didn't say anything. She was quite uncomfortable. She also knew that although this dress was not high-end, it was not cheap either. She was a little uneasy. Yi Xianan said calmly, "This one, it's pretty good." The manager was relieved and said very attentively, "Does Mr. Yi always pay by card or on credit?" Yi Xiangnan always needed a female companion on some occasions. They would all pay in Star's entertainment. But this time it was different, so the manager asked more. Yi Xiangnan took out his card and said calmly, "I'll pay." He swiped his card, and the total amount was only a little more than 100,000 yuan. Sometimes, he couldn't even buy a simple piece of jewelry in the circle of celebrities and upper-class ladies. But, as the manager said, Su Mu was very suitable for this kind of jewelry. She really looked very fresh and elegant. Cymbidium Chinense had also changed his clothes. It was probably because of his bloodline. He looked like a noble little prince. After getting into the car, Yi Xiangnan's voice was quite calm. "Sit with me later. Don't answer the questions you don't want to answer. No one can do anything to you." These words were equivalent to saying that he could afford to offend anyone he wanted to. It was quite frivolous, but it was natural for Yi Xiangnan to say it. He was the one who asked Su Mu to sit beside him. After a while, she suddenly asked, "Actually, you can bring Secretary Li with you." Yi Xiangnan was driving when he turned his head and frowned. "It's a private occasion. You want me to bring my secretary?" "I'm even more unsuitable," she argued in a low voice. Yi Xiangnan chuckled. "Cymbidium Chinense has to go. If I bring someone else, people will think that I'm looking for a stepmother for Cymbidium Chinense." Su Mu was speechless. After a long time, she looked out of the car window. She didn't want to go to such an occasion. Because it was after work and it was the weekend, the traffic was quite bad. It was almost 8 o'clock when they arrived at the hotel. It was at GM Hotel, the largest and most luxurious hotel in City B. Moreover, it was a Chinese banquet. Shenting and Qin Yihuan got married so soon because they heard that Qin Yihuan was pregnant. Qin Imo and Yihuan were quite helpless. They discussed for a while and decided to get married. As for the plan to go to Italy, they didn't put it on hold. After all, Shenting needed to go abroad for his future work. Chapter 49-46. When they arrived at the hotel, they met the newlyweds. Yi Xiangnan, Qin Yihuan, and Shenting were in the same frame, which naturally attracted a lot of attention. After all, this triangle relationship had been maintained for many years. Now that the female lead was married to her childhood sweetheart, CEO Yi was not left behind. He had brought his wife and son. Mrs. Yi looked quite ordinary. Her appearance was not particularly outstanding, but her temperament was very good. She looked a little like a famous model, cold and very thin. Yi Xiangnan handed over a gift. It was a set of jewelry. Looking at the box, one could tell that it was very expensive. Shenting accepted it on his behalf. Both of them simply said a few words, and it was quite amiable. After all, it was a public occasion, and all the big shots cared about their reputation. Su Mu was a little surprised. In her impression, Yi Xiangnan had a very bad temper. However, on such an occasion, he was elegant and did not even have a trace of restraint. As she was thinking about it, Qin Yihuan looked at her and Su Mu gave her a smile. She did not deliberately manage anything. Anyway, after tonight, they would not meet again. She did not need to apologize or please Yi Xiangnan. She only needed to deal with the situation tonight. Later, Yi Xiangnan brought her and Cymbidium Chinense to a table. When Yuan and Yi Mubai were there. Even the elders of the Yi family were there. Other than Yi Mulin and Bai Shuoli, Yi Zhenggang, Su Fu, and Su Fu's husband were actually in the same frame. It was quite mysterious. Su Mu's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, she had a feeling that she was meeting the head of the family. She sat down uncomfortably. As soon as she sat down, Yi Zhenggang snorted. I heard that he has a bad temper. Sumu's eyelids twitched. When Yuan immediately tried to smooth things over. He said with a smile, Yi Xiangnan, I'm talking about you. Yi Xiangnan glanced at Sumu with a faint smile. Sumu felt even more uncomfortable, especially now that she was sitting next to him. The table was filled with people from the Yi family, young and old, looking at her with a special kind of love in their eyes. There were also people at other tables who were secretly peeking over. She was a little speechless. She wanted to escape, but there was nowhere to run. She was being roasted here, and the banquet hadn't started yet. Everyone at the table was staring at her. Yi Xiangnan smiled. Why are you all looking at Sumu? At this moment, Su Fu handed over a box and said gently, I heard that you were coming, so I prepared a small gift for you. Consider it a greeting gift. Sumu felt that it was inappropriate, but in such an occasion, she really didn't know whether to accept it or not. She felt that it was difficult to back down. Yi Xiangnan accepted it on her behalf. Hurry up and thank Grandma. Sumu couldn't be rude, so she added a word. Thank you, Grandma Su. Su Fu smiled and didn't make things difficult for her. She quite liked Sumu. She admired her because she didn't want to get married. She knew a little about Yi Xiangnan's temper. He was probably too arrogant since he was young. He was actually a good kid, but he was also a guy who looked at appearances. Sumu would definitely be at a disadvantage. Although they weren't getting married now, she still prepared a gift. As for Cymbidium chinense, there would be plenty of opportunities to dote on him in the future. Su Fu was already very old, and he had a head of silver hair. But even though he was old, he still had a very special temperament, and he was very loving with his husband. This made Yi Xinggang very uncomfortable, and very jealous. He had waited for many years for his old subordinate to pass away early. He still had the chance to grow old with Su Fu, but that old man never died. He had no choice. Chapter 49-47. Now, seeing that Su Fu was so gentle and polite, he felt upset. Yi Xinggang was the most bad-tempered person. At this time, he felt uncomfortable. He couldn't do anything to his peers, so he vented his anger on the younger generation. He said in a bad tone, their children are already married. Why haven't your children got married yet? How could Yi Xiangnan not know what Yi Xinggang was thinking? He spread the napkin and replied lazily, because the children are grown up, so I'm not so anxious. Yi Xinggang glared at Sumu and said, what about you? You're a girl. Aren't you anxious? To be honest, the old man didn't think highly of Sumu. Even today, he could barely see Sumu. How could Sumu be worthy of his precious grandson? Sumu was so smart and handsome. Which girl in the upper class didn't want to marry him? If it weren't for the little cutie Cymbidium chinense, he wouldn't admit that such a mediocre woman was his granddaughter-in-law. After Yi Xinggang finished, Sumu smiled politely, Mr. Yi and I don't plan to get married. Mr. Yi. No plan. Yi Xinggang glared at her again. But he couldn't help it. Sumu didn't buy it. In fact, he was anxious. Who didn't know the relationship between Sumu and Yi Xiangnan? None of them were in a hurry, but he was. Besides, since Xiangnan brought Sumu here, his attitude was clear. He still had the same intention. As expected, Yi Xiangnan said lightly, Grandpa, let's talk about it later. Sumu looked at him and didn't understand what he meant. Yi Xiangnan smiled. In fact, it was what she thought. But he didn't show it. Because the Yi family sat together and focused on Sumu and Cymbidium chinense, the progress of the wedding was not very important. However, Yi Xiangnan drank a little. He was not drunk, but people close to him could see that he was not in a good mood. When Yuan Ming secretly reminded him, feeling a little helpless. Su Mu was still here. At least, he had to save her some face. He didn't want her to think that he still had Yi Huan in his heart. Especially, they didn't have any emotional foundation. Not only his son, but also Su Mu didn't care about him. When Yuan was also convinced that he could cultivate affection like this. All the people present were also smart. They could see that this couple, who seemed to be getting married, actually didn't like each other. Xiangnan didn't have that intention, and Su Mu wasn't moved either. Especially when they heard that Su Mu had a relationship with a young talent in the legal team of Starlight. This matter was quite a blow to the proud CEO Yi. He was inferior to a subordinate. But love was like this. It didn't care about who came first or who served first. Besides, he didn't like her. Why should she like him? Yi Xiangnan drank too much, so he naturally couldn't drive. Cymbidium Chinense and Su Mu were both there. The rest of the Yi family pretended that they didn't see it and let him fend for himself. In fact, they were throwing him to Su Mu in disguise. Tomorrow, wasn't it Saturday? It was still early. When Yuan took Cymbidium Chinense away and sincerely asked Su Mu to send Yi Xiangnan back. Su Mu didn't know whether to laugh or cry because Yi Sun's things were still with her. But it was really late, and she couldn't disturb when Yuan and the others. Yi Hui winked at her. My brother is in your hands. Chapter 49-48. 1 second to remember. At the entrance of the hotel, it was a little cold at night. Su Mu watched as the Yi family took the Cymbidium Chinense away. It was obvious that they wanted to make peace with the Yi family. However, there was one person who wasn't very happy, and that was Yi Xinggang. Yi Xinggang was old, but the older he got, the weirder he became. It was probably because of Auntie Wang's matter that he disliked Su Mu. He felt that his family's good cabbage had been taken away by this pig, Su Mu. Yi Xinggang snorted and glared at Su Mu. Seize the opportunity. It's not every day. Su Mu was a little speechless, but she couldn't do anything to him. Yi Xiangnan chuckled and didn't mind. He said a few words to Yi Xinggang and got into the car. Su Mu really didn't know what he meant, but she didn't want to ask. She closed the car door and nodded at Yi Xinggang. Yi Xinggang's expression was very subtle. Su Mu felt a sense of shame in her heart. She followed him into the car and fastened her seatbelt. Yi Xiangnan seemed to have really drunk a lot. Once he got into the car, he closed his eyes and leaned his head against the back of the seat. When Su Mu got in, he just tilted his head and knocked in front of him. Send me back to the villa. He was quite impolite. He either treated her as a chauffeur, or he didn't treat her like an outsider. Su Mu pursed her lips and said calmly, Yi Xiangnan, you don't seem that sad. He smiled and subconsciously touched the watch on his wrist with his fingers. He closed his eyes. How should I be sad? Making a scene at the wedding and making a fool of myself. Su Mu didn't say anything. His long and narrow eyes opened a slit, and then he smiled lightly. You sound a little jealous. No. Su Mu said coldly. Yi Xiangnan nodded with understanding. Yes, Mrs. Yi only has Lawyer Shin in her heart. Su Mu couldn't take it anymore. Yi Xiangnan, don't go overboard. She was about to get out of the car. A strong arm quickly covered the back of her hand, and then he sneered, you haven't even unbuckled your seatbelt. How are you going to get off? How are you going to survive in the upper class if you can't even act? As he spoke, he leaned over. Su Mu was stunned. She could feel the faint smell of alcohol. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was refreshing. After about a minute, he finally left. Sumu caressed her lips. Will they think I'm drunk driving? He seemed to chuckle softly. She was a little speechless. But she still started the car. Now she was going to send this drunkard back. If she sent him back, she would have nothing to do with it. Sumu was a little naive. Yi Xiangnan was obviously not in a good mood tonight. He needed someone to accompany him. There was no one else. It was her. The car drove to the villa. It was dark inside, and there was no one. She stopped the car and looked beside her. Hey, Yi Xiangnan. He seemed to be asleep, leaning against the back of the seat with his eyes closed. His breath was a little hot, so the temperature in the car seemed to be very high. Sumu's gaze moved from his face to his Adam's apple. She thought to herself that he was indeed very good-looking. His facial features were even more delicate than a girl's. Coupled with the temperament that he had developed since he was young, it was no wonder that Elder Yi looked at her as if she was a pig. Even if it was just a once-in-a-relationship, in the eyes of ordinary people, young Master Yi would definitely be at a disadvantage. Sumu called him, but he didn't wake up. Sumu reached out to push him. He caught her hand and pressed it against her heart. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. Don't leave tonight. Chapter 49-49. Sumu was stunned. Then she wanted to pull her hand back, but he held it tightly and didn't intend to let her go. Yi Xiangnan, what are you doing? Let me go. She unfastened the seat belt with her other hand and wanted to get out of the car. Unexpectedly, he also let her get out of the car. But as soon as she got out of the car, the man's voice came from the car lazily. You can't get out. The door needs to be specially activated after it is closed. Then, Yi Xiangnan got out of the car lazily. Standing under the moonlight, he looked inexplicably noble, but also very hateful. He wasn't drunk at all. He had been asleep just to make her let down her guard. Sumu gritted her teeth. Yi Xiangnan, you are so boring. He leaned against the car with a faint smile. From Mr. Yi to Yi Xiangnan, we are much closer. He walked towards her with a happy face. Sumu, stop it. Stay here. He caught her and trapped her between the car and himself. He was much gentler than before, probably because he was drunk. In Sumu's eyes, he was even gentle. He was very tall, and she was trapped by him. Even if she wore high heels, she could only reach his shoulders. And he was so close that she had to put her fingers on his shoulders to push him away, but it was very difficult. Sumu lowered his eyes and looked at his fine clothes. His voice trembled a little. Mr. Yi, you're drunk. He slightly lowered his head and whispered in her ear, don't you know whether I am drunk or not? Yi Xiangnan admitted that he wanted to flirt with her. After all, it was related to a man's self-esteem. She was the mother of his child. He didn't allow her to think about others. In fact, it didn't matter whether she loved him or not, but she couldn't think about the man. So, it didn't matter if it was necessary to make a sacrifice. Indeed, not many women could withstand him like this. Sumu didn't love him, and she disliked him even more. Sometimes, when he was too arrogant, she even hated and loathed him. But in all fairness, few women could stand such a handsome and noble man who was full of coquettish words. Sumu couldn't take it either. She could only helplessly lean against the car, trying to get as far away from him as possible. Yi Xiangnan chuckled softly as he got closer and closer. Just then, the lights in the villa lit up and a voice rang out, Sir, you're back. I thought you weren't coming back. Auntie Chen was standing at the entrance of the villa. She was wearing a coat over her pajamas. It was obvious that she had fallen asleep. She thought that Yi Xiangnan was alone, but when she looked closely, she saw Su Mu. Her eyes widened. "Miss Su, you're here too." Auntie Chen's voice became softer and she stammered, "Sir. Did I break something?" Yi Xiangnan snorted. "What do you think?" Auntie Chen was suddenly at a loss. "Sir, I'm sorry. And Miss Su, I'm sorry." Miss Su, you look really good today." "You're on a date with Sir, right?" "Well, if there's nothing else, I'm going to sleep first. I'm old and I sleep like a log. I won't wake up even if there's any movement," Auntie Chen said as she ran away, as if there was a ghost chasing after her. The air was filled with a mesmerizing atmosphere again. Of course, the faint warmth just now suddenly disappeared, and Yi Xiangnan didn't have that kind of heart anymore. Chapter 49-50. Half of it was because of the alcohol earlier, and the other half was because of the atmosphere. After all, a man and a woman were sitting in the same car, and he was a little tipsy as well. He just wanted someone to accompany him. Yi Xiangnan stuffed his hands in his pockets and took 2 steps back to let Su Mu out. He then said calmly, "There's a guest room here. It's getting late, so let's put up with it for the night. I'll go get the Cymbidium chinense things tomorrow morning." Su Mu didn't want to stay here. She wanted to avoid arousing suspicion. Yi Xiangnan could tell what she was thinking and laughed coldly. "We've already made a child together. What's the point of avoiding suspicion? No one will believe it anyway. As for Shen Wenshuan, just give up. It's impossible between you and him, and his family won't agree to it either." His words were harsh. Su Mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. In the end, she still stayed. However, she didn't sleep on the 2nd floor and found a place to sleep on the 1st floor. She didn't even remove her makeup. That night passed peacefully. Early in the morning, Yi Xiangnan looked at her and frowned. "You didn't take off this to sleep last night. And what the hell is on your face?" There was a strong sense of disgust. Su Mu ate her breakfast and said in a low voice, "I'll do it when I get home. I'll return the clothes to you after I'm done washing them." Yi Xiangnan laughed coldly. "What do I want this for? Am I going to wear it for myself or for my future wife? Forget it, you can keep it. You don't even have a single decent piece of clothing. Are you going to be so uncouth when you attend events in the future?" He really had a sharp tongue and didn't hold back at all. Usually, he wouldn't be like this. He was probably still unhappy about being interrupted by Auntie Chen last night. Auntie Chen hid far away. She knew that her husband was unhappy, but she didn't know that her appearance would spoil his plans. She secretly thought that if she didn't appear, would he have gotten what he wanted? She thought so. The atmosphere was really good at that time. Su Mu lowered her head and tore her toast. She spoke very slowly, "Yi Xiangnan, you've actually been reminding me that we're not compatible. I also think that we're not compatible, but why do you insist on forcing us together? Don't you feel contradictory?" Young Master Yi Xiangnan's temper flared up once more as he placed his hands by his side and glared at her. "You sure have a sharp tongue. I heard from my mother that you're going to rebuild your media career and become a streamer in the future. Now that you're so good at scolding people, you'll definitely succeed in the future. I've got to congratulate you in advance." Su Mu felt that he was really poisonous and glared at him. Yi Xiangnan didn't give in either. His eyes and expression were full of mockery. Su Mu said coldly, "Then I will accept CEO Ye's blessing in advance." Yi Xiangnan flung the tablecloth in his hand, stood up and walked out. He didn't look like someone to be trifled with. After a while, the sound of a car engine came from outside. Sumu was still eating breakfast when Auntie Chin came out of nowhere and whispered, "Sir seems to be very unhappy." "Miss Sue, do you want to coax him?" "Why should I coax him? He's not a 3-year-old child." Sumu looked confused and didn't want to cooperate. Auntie Chin felt that it was all her fault. Why did she come out yesterday? Otherwise, it wouldn't be like this now. Auntie Chin wanted to say something to make up for it, but Sumu obviously didn't want to say it. Miss Sue didn't seem to be easy to get along with. Auntie Chin felt that she and Auntie Wang had really misjudged her before. In the past, Miss Sue was very kind, and of course, she was very polite to her now. But now, she didn't seem to fall for Sir's tricks and didn't pay much attention to him. Was she charmed by Sir's beauty last night? Chapter 49-51. Updated quickly. In the past, Miss Sue was very kind, and of course, she was quite polite to her now. But now, it seemed like she did not fall for Sir's tricks at all and did not pay much attention to him. Was she mesmerized by Sir's beauty last night? Now that she was sober, she felt like she did not buy it at all. In Auntie Chen's heart, she suddenly felt a sense of respect. Which woman would not fawn over their Sir? Miss Sue was so strong and did not fall for Sir's tricks at all. Auntie Chen's eyes were filled with light as she looked at Sumu. After Sumu finished her breakfast, she walked out slowly. In the car, Yi Xiangnan was already impatient from waiting, his long fingers tapping on the steering wheel. When he saw Sumu coming over, he opened the door to the front passenger seat and looked at her rudely. "You still want to sit in the back seat? You want me to be your chauffeur?" Sumu felt like she was fucking a dog in her heart, thinking that he was really being unreasonable. She got into the car and did not say anything. Yi Xiangnan seemed to be quite angry as he started the car. All the way until the car arrived at her place, they did not say a word. Sumu opened the door and got out. Yi Xiangnan also came down and followed her upstairs. Sumu did not think much and opened the door. But the moment she entered, he hugged her from behind. She could vaguely feel something and whispered, "I don't think it's suitable for me to look like this right now, right? I don't want to be picky right now." He leaned close to her ear and smelled the faint perfume that she had sprayed last night. Sumu struggled and was very angry. "I've never seen someone as shameless as you." "Yes, I'm shameless." "Then, who was the one who ran into my hotel room back then?" He murmured, "You provoked me first. I haven't even gotten married yet. Shouldn't I settle the interest with you?" Sumu was so angry that she struggled again. "You were the one who couldn't keep her. What does that have to do with me? You've forgotten about it after so many years. I didn't show up either. Why can't you get married?" "Yi Xiangnan, you're useless. Don't put the blame on me." Sharp-tongued. He snorted coldly. "Who was the one who came out at the critical moment and said that she gave birth to my son?" Sumu almost jumped up, but he didn't let her go. "Now that Auntie Chin is not here, no one can save you," he whispered in her ear. It was as if he didn't care about anything else other than angering her. Men were probably all like this. They clearly knew that there was someone else in her heart, but they still wanted to obtain it, wanted to conquer it. Sumu didn't know where she got the strength from, but she turned around and slapped him. Yi Xiangnan's expression was stagnant. He stared at her later. "Shameless," Sumu said coldly, "I'm not interested in Mr. Yi at all." There were obvious marks on Yi Xiangnan's face. He really wanted to hit back, but he let her go after staring at her for a long time. He took the Cymbidium Chinense luggage and snorted. "Wash the damn thing on your face and change your clothes." My mother asked you to have dinner together. If it was in normal times, she wouldn't care about him. But yesterday, Cymbidium Chinense went to Ye's house. She was afraid that he would feel uneasy, so she wanted to see Cymbidium Chinense. Because Yi Xiangnan was here, Sumu didn't take a bath. She just cleaned her face and changed a set of clean clothes. She was neat but also very simple. It was totally different from last night. Yi Xiangnan didn't expect her to be amazing. Anyway, she looked like this. She would look like this even if he killed her. He thought viciously in his heart. Chapter 49-52. On the way to the villa, the car was particularly silent, and no one spoke. Yi Xiangnan was angry, but Sumu hated him and didn't want to talk to him at all. Yi Xiangnan purposely lit a cigarette and smoked in the car. She didn't even roll down the window. It was obvious that she wanted to piss her off. Sumu didn't say anything, but quietly opened the window on her side. The wind blew in, and she felt much better. Leaning her head against the back of the seat and looking at the scenery outside, she fell asleep unconsciously. It was probably because she didn't sleep well last night. Yi Xiangnan found that she was asleep, so he stopped at a red light and frowned at Sumu. Of course, other than being ordinary, there was nothing extraordinary about her. He kept frowning and didn't say anything. He just looked at her carefully, but in fact, he didn't know what he was looking at. What was so good about Sumu? This face was ordinary, and there was really nothing good about it. He put out the cigarette, closed the window, and slowed down a little. Otherwise, his mother would say that he bullied Sumu again. This woman was obviously not beautiful, but she had a bad temper and liked to hit people. He didn't even hit her. Yi Xiangnan's car slowly drove into Wen Garden. Because it was Yi Xiangnan's gift to Wen Yuan, it was called Wen Garden, which was quite romantic. Yi Xiangnan stopped the car, and when he opened the door, he said lazily, like a pig. Sumu woke up, looked around, and bit her lower lip. Have we arrived? Because she was asleep, her voice was a little watery, and it was quite seductive. Yi Xiangnan glanced at her, and didn't say anything. He got out of the car and took the luggage from the trunk. In fact, there wasn't much. Sumu was very poor, so how could she buy many things for a child? Yi Xiangnan didn't care, and casually handed the luggage to the servant. Bring it to the young master's room. The servant immediately went, but he was very polite and nodded at Sumu. Hello, Miss Su. Sumu smiled. Not long after the servant went upstairs, he probably told Cymbidium Chinense that his mother was coming. Cymbidium Chinense quickly ran down from the second floor and threw himself into Sumu's arms, very clingy. Yi Xiannan frowned. Actually, he didn't want his son to be too attached to his mother and lose some of his manly spirit. However, Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai didn't think this way. They were unconditionally indulgent towards their grandson, but they were rather strict towards Yi Xiannan in the past. Sumu reached out and touched his son's head, and smiled. You are still so. Cymbidium Chinense immediately stood up straight, looking very obedient. This made Yi Xiangnan feel very surprised. He felt that Sumu was very suitable to take care of Cymbidium Chinense. He always felt that Cymbidium Chinense would be spoiled if he followed his ancestors. But this was the best choice at the moment. As for the future, Yi Xiangnan still had some plans. Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai also came down from upstairs. Wen Yuan loved Sumu very much, and Yi Mubai also had a good impression of her. The elders were very open-minded. If there was no fate, it couldn't be forced. This was referring to Qin Yi Huan. As for Sumu, it depended on Yi Xiangnan's own ability. He already had a son. If he couldn't handle the child's mother, it could only mean that he was too useless. When Yuan and Sumu talked for a while, and then he asked the servant to bring tea. When Yuan didn't work very much these years, and when he was at home, he trained the servants to be obedient. So he couldn't tolerate Aunt Wang's tricks. If the old master liked her, then let him keep her. Chapter 49-53. The servant was very good at reading. He immediately brought over the tea that Mrs. Yi treasured. Sumu took a sip. When Yuan remembered something and said softly, Yi Hui went out early in the morning. Otherwise, she would have something to talk to you about. Yi Hui was a freelancer and spent most of her time at home. When Yuan also hoped that Sumu could be friends with her so that both of them could have company. For some reason, Sumu just didn't like Wen Yuan. It was probably because her experience was similar to hers in the past, and Sumu's crime was worse than hers in the past. Sumu was asked to stay for dinner by Wen Yuan. After dinner, Yi Xiangnan had something to do and left. Sumu left in the afternoon because Wen Yuan answered a phone call and looked a little strange. Sumu felt that the Yi family had private matters to deal with, and it was not convenient for her to stay here as an outsider. So she said goodbye. Wen Yuan asked the driver to send her, but she refused and went out to take a taxi. When she was sitting in the taxi, she received a call from Yi Xiangnan. He seemed to be at a business meeting and remembered to make a call before leaving. There's an interview at 9:00 on Monday at Cymbidium Chinense. I'll pick you up then. He paused for a moment and said, tidy yourself up. He found a high-end nursery for Cymbidium Chinense. All children had to be interviewed when they went in. Even the Yi family, which had a prominent identity, had to go through the formalities. Sumu remembered that Wen Yuan had told her just now, so she nodded. On the other side, Yi Xiangnan hung up the phone. He was indeed at a business meeting. It was a headache. Because Bai Anan and Qin Xian had been caught. The location was at Qin Xian's residence, and they were caught by He Huan. It was said that the scene at that time was terrible. At this moment, Yi Xiangnan was in Qin Xian's villa. Qin Mo and He Huan were both there. He Huan didn't look guilty at all like the man's parents. Instead, she looked a little excited, which made people speechless. In addition, Yi Mulin and Bai Shuali were also there. Bai Shuali thought that Qin Xian was quite handsome, but Yi Mulin's face was not so good. As a father, he felt that his daughter was at a disadvantage. Wen Yuan and Yi Mubai had also arrived. There were so many elders sitting here, and almost all the people of the same generation had come. The male lead and the female lead were wearing black nightgowns. It was as if they were being interrogated. It was very stressful. Qin Xian supported his head with his hand and looked at Bai Anan. Even someone as thick-skinned as Bai Anan didn't dare to look at them. It was all because of the alcohol. In the end, Qin Xian said, "Let's get married." Bai Anan looked at him. "Why are you getting married?" Qin Xian sighed. "You might get pregnant." Bai Anan's gaze was quite strange. She kept staring at him. Qin Xian smiled helplessly. "Don't you remember?" "Stop." Bai Anan really didn't want him to recall the details in front of so many people. "I'll take the medicine. I'll take care of it." Qin Xian said calmly, "You're already in your 30s. It's probably difficult for you to get pregnant. I don't want to deprive you of this rare opportunity." Bai Anan was furious. She picked up a pillow and started to hit him. "Qin Xian, you're too despicable." He actually dared to laugh softly. It was obvious that he didn't care about these elders. He was too shameless. Even if he was shameless, Bai Anan still had to be. Bai Anan felt that it was quite embarrassing. Wasn't it just lying together? Everyone knew about it. The only thing missing was the news. Both parents were interested. One was a young woman, and the other had a strange temper. Both of them wanted to sell out immediately. Now that they had something on them, how could they not seize the opportunity? Chapter 49-54. Bai Shuali and He Huan were already familiar with each other, so they were more than happy to see this happen. They had already gathered together to discuss the details of the wedding. Bai Anan looked at Qin Xian speechlessly. Qin Xian was also looking at her. Suddenly, Bai Anan found it difficult to look at him directly. Her face suddenly felt a little hot. All of a sudden, the female lead ran upstairs. Bai Anan was actually embarrassed. This was probably the first time. Qin Xian did not chase after her. With so many elders around, he still had some sense of propriety. He had grown up by Qin Imo and He Huan's side. Among the three children, he was the most spoiled, so he was usually very picky and did not like any of the matchmaking matches. He did not like Bai Anan that much, but he did not hate her when they were together. If they were to arrange things according to the rules, she was not his ideal type except for her looks. After discussing for the whole afternoon, they finally decided that Bai Anan was not allowed to take the medicine. If she was pregnant, they would get married right away. If not, it was up to them. Bai Anan felt that her reputation was more or less done for now that the matter had blown up to this point. After the elders left, she was still there, sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed. She did not even bother with work and just took out some snacks to watch TV. Qin Xian came over and glanced at her. "You look like you're very unwilling." Yesterday, they went to the banquet and party together. They drank so much that they could not remember how they got here or what happened afterward. When they woke up in the night, they blacked out again. They did not expect that He Huan would come over early in the morning to show concern for Qin Xian. It was the second day of Shinting and Qin Yi Huan's wedding. Shouldn't she show concern for the newlyweds? Shinting felt that it was quite cruel. He brought the cold beer over and sat beside Bai Anan. He took a sip and then looked at Bai Anan. "Before I confirm whether or not I'm pregnant, are you going to stay here and not leave? Or must you get pregnant? Do you want to marry me so badly?" Bai Anan's gaze never left the TV. She was still stuffing food into her mouth as she said, "If I go back, my mom will give me a test every day. At least not here." As she said that, she looked at the beer in his hand and kicked him. "Go make dinner and you're still drinking. Didn't you drink enough last night?" Qin Xian frowned. "I'm not your servant." Bai Anan snorted softly and kicked him again. "I'm hungry." Qin Xian put down the beer in his hand and said as he got up, "Think about it carefully. You'll get pregnant if you stay here. I'll stay in the master bedroom, you can do as you please," she said somewhat domineeringly. Qin Xian walked to the kitchen. "Lawyer Bai, is this how you pursue men?" Bai Anan didn't respond. Qin Xian turned his head away. She sat there eating snacks again, as if she didn't hear what he said. Qin Xian shook his head. Why did he think that she was angry or sad? Bai Anan wouldn't be sad. It was as if she was made of iron and nothing could affect her. She had liked Brother Shinting for many years. But in the end, she was still very free and easy. When he opened the fridge, Qin Xian's fingers closed the fridge door with a loud bang. Bai Anan turned her head to look but didn't say anything. She continued to eat snacks and watch the TV. After a while, she picked up a beer and drank 2 mouthfuls. After drinking it, she realized that Qin Xian had drunk it before. "I'll update a chapter tomorrow." Chapter 49-55. Qin Xian made by Ainan's favorite hot pot in the kitchen. He didn't know why he made it for her. It was just a matter of time. What era was it now? However, both of them were quite pure, so Qin Xian didn't feel like he was taking advantage of her. He was also very pure, alright. Men and women were already equal. When the hot pot was ready, he brought it to the dining room. Bai Ainan brought the beer over and sat down opposite him. Qin Xian shook the bottle and frowned. You drank half a bottle. Bai Ainan ate the hot pot and said matter-of-factly, yeah, why? You won't get drunk if you drink some beer. Qin Xian's expression didn't look too good. He put down the chopsticks in his hand. What if you get pregnant? How can it be so fast? Even if you find out that you're pregnant, it'll be more than 10 days later. Oh, I forgot to tell you that yesterday wasn't a good day to get pregnant, Bai Ainan said naturally without any hint of annoyance. Qin Xian stared at her and then said coldly, I thought Lawyer Bai was just a legal machine. I didn't expect you to know biological knowledge. Bai Ainan frowned. Qin Xian, do you think you're at a disadvantage? If you think you're at a disadvantage, I'll take the medicine and we'll definitely not have a child. You definitely don't have to marry me. What do you think? He stared at her. Bai Ainan squeezed out a smile. It's decided. Qin Xian didn't say anything. Bai Ainan continued, this can be considered a farewell meal. She felt that it was quite boring. She could smell his strong disdain towards her. Bai Ainan was very well off. Although she didn't think that she was especially beautiful, she wouldn't throw herself at him. Moreover, he was younger than her and he was Shinting's younger brother. In the future, she wouldn't be looked down upon and she didn't want to be looked down upon. Bai Ainan felt that she didn't care too much. After she finished eating, she walked upstairs. As she walked, she said, I can't wear the dress from last night. Let me borrow a new one. I'll leave in a while. Qin Xian sat there and looked at the pot on the table. He remembered that Bai Ainan loved to eat and could eat this very much. Last time, she had finished half of the pot by herself. But now, she barely touched it. Are you in a bad mood or can't eat? He cocked his head and watched her go upstairs. About 10 minutes later, Bai Ainan came down. She was wearing a black shirt and black pants. It was unknown where she found them, but they actually fit her well. She rolled up the legs of the pants and tucked the shirt into her waist. It looked quite nice. Bai Ainan took out a stack of cash from her handbag and threw it on the sofa. Money for the meal. Qin Xian was a little insulted. Is this the money for the meal? Bai Ainan snorted. Then what are you counting on? Qin Xian stopped talking and stared at her. It wasn't until Bai Ainan walked to the door that he murmured, I'll send you. No need, I've called a taxi. Bai Ainan's voice sounded as she walked out of the living room. Qin Xian stood up. He couldn't take it anymore. He didn't know why he was unhappy with her. In short, he was a little annoyed. He didn't know how to deal with such a relationship when he didn't really want her to be his wife. Bai Ainan wasn't insensitive. She probably felt it. Qin Xian let out a long sigh and got up to change. Chapter 49-56. Read it for free. Bai Ainan did call a taxi. She waited at the entrance of the villa for a while and got in the taxi. She didn't go straight back to her apartment. Instead, she stopped at a pharmacy in the city and went in to buy medicine. She didn't go straight back to her apartment. Instead, she stopped at a pharmacy in the city and went in to buy medicine. It was her first time and she had no experience. She bought a box of all kinds of medicine and called Yuren. Help me find out which morning after medicine is the most effective. Secretary Yo was stunned. After a long time, she stammered, Lawyer Bai, who did you do that with? Bai Ainin didn't say anything and hung up the phone. She didn't even want to mention Qin Xian's name. He didn't want to. Why did he have to talk about having children and getting married? He didn't have any plans at all, or he didn't have any interest in her. Bai Ainin naturally wouldn't get close to him. She stood under the hot sun for a while and felt her head was heavy. She even broke out in a cold sweat. Secretary Ye called. She hesitated for a moment before saying, her name is Yiding. I heard she eats this. She guessed and asked, is it little President Qin? Don't tell anyone. Bai Ainin snorted. She didn't know that it had been photographed by the paparazzi. Especially when she came out of Qin Xian's villa and bought a lot of morning after medicine, it quickly became a trending topic. It was quite exposed. At least, it overshadowed Shinting and Qin Yihuan's marriage. In addition, Bai Ainin and Shinting's love history, Qin Yihuan and Yi Xiangnan, and Su Mu were released together. It was a carnival atmosphere. Stars Entertainment and King Entertainment had to work together to suppress it, but those who were observant could still know that Bai Ainin and young Master Qin had a romantic relationship. Bai Ainin stopped a taxi. After getting in the car, she rummaged through the pile of medicine to find the one that Yeren had mentioned. After looking at it for a long time, she put it down. When she reached her apartment, she got out of the car and went back with a bag of medicine. Qin Xian's car also stopped and the window slowly rolled down. He stared at Bai Ainin and the bag in her hand. Was she so stupid? This was medicine. Did she buy so much to eat? Qin Xian thought about it and got out of the car. He quickly walked over and stopped her before she got into the elevator. Just as Bai Ainin was about to enter, her hand was caught and she turned around. Qin Xian stared at her and frowned. Do you really want to take the medicine? Bai Ainin was speechless. Did you come here to get your clothes back, or did you take too much medicine? Isn't it good not to have children? At that time, when he said that he had given birth to a child, she really did feel her heart skip a beat, but it turned out not to be. It turned out that young Master Qin could also be impulsive, and when a man was impulsive, his words usually didn't count. After Bai Ainin finished speaking, Qin Xian asked in a low voice, why did you buy so much medicine? Can't I save it for next time? Bai Ainin snorted and walked into the elevator. Qin Xian followed him in. Bai Ainin looked at him. Little President Qin, don't worry. I'll take the medicine. I won't blame you. Qin Xian frowned. I told you, you don't have to eat it. Bai Ainin didn't say anything and only laughed softly. It was a little mocking. Qin Xian frowned even more and narrowed his eyes. You want to kill an innocent child just like that? Bai Ainin couldn't help but say, Qin Xian, are you an idiot? Where did the child come from? Aren't you going to kill it now? He stared at her and held her shoulders. Bai Ainin, I told you that you can give birth to it. Chapter 49-57. Aren't you going to kill it now? He stared at her and held her shoulders. Bai Ainin, I told you that I can give birth to it. Bai Ainin took 2 steps back and leaned against the wall of the elevator, looking at him quietly. After a while, she said softly, and then, Qin Xian, if we have a child and we get married, what about love? Have you never looked forward to it? Or are you willing to give up on your future happiness for a child that hasn't even existed yet? Qin Xian said straightforwardly, I'm a pragmatic person, I've never looked forward to love. Otherwise, he wouldn't have never felt anything for the past 28 years. Yihuan, Qin Mo, Shinting, and Yi Huan were his family. If Bai Anan were to get pregnant, she and the child would be his family too. That was it. Bai Anan looked at him and smiled quietly. Qin Xian, I can't stand the fact that my future husband doesn't love me. She studied law and looked like an emotionless machine, but she felt that she was worthy of love. She didn't particularly yearn for it, but she didn't want to settle for it either. A Shinting who didn't love her was enough. She didn't need another Qin Xian. Bai Anan let out a long sigh. After saying that, she felt relieved. Qin Xian looked at her quietly and didn't say anything. He just punched the wall of the elevator when it stopped. Bai Anan walked out. Qin Xian was still in the elevator and he looked at her calmly. Bai Anan, think carefully. His tone was a little heavy. Little young Master Qin had never spoken like this before. He had never treated anyone so seriously before. Bai Anan turned her head and smiled. No matter if I'm robbing you for money or for sex, I seem to be disappointed. If she wanted children and marriage, she could do it any time. There were a lot of people who wanted to marry Bai Anan. It was just a matter of whether she liked them or not. She didn't lack good-looking men and she didn't lack money. After saying that, Bai Anan swiped her card and entered the elevator. The elevator door in front of Qin Xian closed. He stood inside and did not press the button for a long time. After a long time, he punched the wall of the elevator hard, went down, and sat in his car. As he smoked, he looked upstairs. It was true. He did not like Bai Anan's personality. She was emotionless and would not act coquettishly towards him. Of course, Qin Xian couldn't imagine how Bai Anan would act coquettishly, but at least she could be a little softer, and they could communicate more. He didn't want children, but he didn't want her to take medicine. As for why, he did not know either. In the apartment upstairs, Bai Anan returned home. She opened the box of medicine and took it. It was quite disgusting. She swallowed for a long time before eating it. It felt like she had eaten poison. She only felt better after drinking a large glass of water. She had never thought that the brand of medicine she was taking had a transparent price, and this pharmacy was a private one. The boss was a goblin, and he had actually bought fake medicine. It was not a morning after medicine at all, but an ordinary vitamin. Anyway, those who got pregnant because the medicine did not work would not dare to come here, and there was no evidence. Bai Anan only felt that after taking the medicine, she felt much more at ease. Elegant people were very meticulous. If she said that the brand was good, it must be good. She did not think of the possibility of taking fake medicine at all. After taking the medicine, she looked at the floor-to-ceiling window. Qin Xian's car was still there. He was probably sitting in the car and did not move for a long time. Bai Anan looked at him quietly and pursed her lips. Chapter 49-58. After that, they didn't seem to have anything to do with each other. Bai Anan was still her lawyer while Qin Xian continued to be his little President Qin. Coupled with Shinting's honeymoon, he had a lot of things to do, so he quickly forgot about this matter. On Monday, Yi Xiangnan took Cymbidium Chinense to an interview at a nursery, and Yi Xiangnan drove his son. Cymbidium Chinense sat in the back of the car, wearing a very beautiful little suit, like a gentleman. Yi Xiangnan was also dressed very formally, with sunglasses on his high nose bridge. His hands were on the steering wheel, and he told his son some key things, such as interview techniques, and so on. Cymbidium Chinense listened obediently. When Yi Xiangnan felt that it was enough, Cymbidium Chinense asked softly, "Dad, will I live with Grandma and the others in the future?" "What about Mom?" Yi Xiangnan curled his lips and said, you can live with your mom at any time when she's resting, but I don't think she has much time to rest in the next 2 years. Why? Cymbidium Chinense raised his little face and asked innocently and cutely. Yi Xiangnan thought for a moment, and then smiled slightly, because she wants to be a strong woman. If she wants to be strong, she has to put in a lot more effort than others, understand? Cymbidium Chinense said oh, and then asked again, did Dad also put in a lot of effort to become strong? Yi Xiangnan thought for a moment, and then said yes. Cymbidium Chinense said oh, and then didn't ask anymore, but just secretly stared at the back of his head. Naturally, Yi Xiangnan saw it from the rearview mirror, but he just smiled and didn't expose the little guy. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of Su Mu's shabby apartment. Yi Xiangnan took out his phone and dialed Su Mu's number. We're here. You can come down. After that, he hung up the phone. His slender fingers gently tapped on the steering wheel. Cymbidium Chinense asked a little anxiously, Dad, are we not going home if we don't get off? For Cymbidium Chinense, the place where Su Mu was his home. He actually wanted to go back and have a look. Although his grandparents ate well, slept well, and had a fragrant bed, and the aunties there treated him extremely well, he still wanted to be with his mother. However, his father said that his mother wanted to become stronger and needed a lot of time, so he would give his mother time. Yi Xiangnan secretly glanced at his father. When his mother became stronger, he would be with his mother. Well, it's not that I'm ignoring my father. I'll just ignore him a little. Who asked him to have other aunties? Thinking of this, Yi Sun was quite disappointed. He hung his head low. Yi Xiangnan turned his head and looked at him. What's wrong again? Cymbidium Chinense's little face was a little tense. Nothing. Cymbidium Chinense, you've grown up. Especially for boys, you should learn to restrain yourself. Don't show all your emotions on your face, understand? Yi Xiangnan comforted his son and then asked softly, tell me, what were you thinking about just now? Why are you in such a bad mood? As he said that, he turned his head and touched Cymbidium Chinense's little face. Cymbidium Chinense said quite seriously, Dad, you said that I shouldn't show my emotions. I'd better bear with it silently. You can tell me in front of Dad, Qin Emo said in a low voice. Cymbidium Chinense replied with an oh, and then said quite seriously, then I'll really tell you. Yi Xiangnan nodded. Cymbidium Chinense said stubbornly, when I become stronger in the future, I won't have other aunties, only my wife. Chapter 49-59. Cymbidium Chinense said dryly, when I become stronger in the future, I won't have any other aunties, only my wife. Yi Xiangnan cursed in his heart. If he had known this was the answer, he wouldn't have asked this kid this question. At such a young age, he already knew how to play tricks. Yi Xiangnan was speechless. He stared at his son for a long time before he said, not bad. You'd better remember this sentence. Don't wait until you grow up to slap yourself in the face. I won't. Cymbidium Chinense bit his lip and said softly, I won't. Yi Xiangnan didn't know what to say. He reached out and touched his head. There was a hint of hurt in Cymbidium Chinense's big eyes. This hurt might be something that Yi Xiangnan could never make up for in his life. Thinking of this, his heart sank. Fortunately, Su Mu came over. She tidied up. She wore a white t-shirt, jeans, and a beige cardigan. She was clean and tidy. But in a family like the Yi family, it was very ordinary. Yi Xiangnan wanted to say something, but Cymbidium Chinense was here. If he said it, Cymbidium Chinense would say that he disliked his mother. Sighed, the little guy was hard to serve. Yi Xiangnan looked at Sumu sitting in the back seat and pointed with his chin. There's an interview guide over there. Take a look. It's best to follow it. That nursery is very strict. Sumu nodded. She reached out and touched Cymbidium chinense's little head. Then, she began to read the information. Secretary Li was well prepared. All the details were written in it. After reading it, Sumu had a feeling that it was very difficult to be Yi Xiangnan's secretary. She really had to be all round. When the car arrived at the nursery, Sumu had just finished reading. She put down the information. Yi Xiangnan parked the car and tilted his head. Everything clear. Secretary Li said that the director of this nursery focuses on a warm family atmosphere. In a while, please cooperate. Sumu wasn't an idiot. She knew what he meant. She nodded. I will cooperate if necessary. What he meant was, don't go overboard. Yi Xiangnan smiled and opened the car door. He walked to the back and opened the Cymbidium chinense door. He hugged the little guy and said, all right, young man. Behave well later. Cymbidium chinense's face was red. It was rare for him to be treated like this. He looked at the beautiful nursery in front of him. It was like something out of a cartoon. His eyes were filled with yearning. Sumu followed them into the nursery. The principal personally interviewed the candidates, and there were also 2 teachers in their 40s who looked very amiable and reliable. The principal was in his early 50s. He was kind and interviewed them very politely. Because of the materials prepared by Secretary Li, they answered fluently. Cymbidium chinense's performance was surprisingly good. Although he only went to school for a month or 2, he really knew a lot compared with children of the same age. The principal was probably very satisfied and kept nodding. Sumu and Yi Xiangnan looked at each other. At this time, no matter how estranged and bad their relationship was, they were both parents of Cymbidium chinense. They both had a sense of pride as old parents. When they were feeling proud, the principal over there said kindly, our Cymbidium chinense children are excellent. They passed the interview completely and the family atmosphere is very good. Now we will go through the admission procedures. Mr. Yi, the tuition fee is paid annually. It's 128,000 yuan a year. In addition, bring the relevant certificates of the children and the marriage certificate of Mr. and Mrs. Yi to us. These are the basic procedures of enrollment. The principal was also very gentle. Chapter 4960. However, after she says that, Cymbidium chinense can't keep a straight face. But thinking of his father's words, he tries his best to control his facial expression. Such a poor little boy knows how to control his facial expression. It's really distressing. Yi Xiangnan raises his eyebrows. Do we need this for admission? Damn it, why didn't Secretary Li tell him? Sumu is also very strange, but she can't say anything in front of Cymbidium chinense. She is afraid that the little boy will be more sad. The principal is a little confused. Mr. Yi, every high-end nursery will ask for it. Yi Xiangnan repeats again, do we need a marriage certificate? Well, divorce certificate is also fine. Seeing their expressions, the principal is relieved. But it's very strange that Mr. and Mrs. Yi are so loving just now. They hold each other's shoulder and shake hands without hesitation. They are also very patient to the child. How can such a family not have a marriage certificate? If they take out the divorce certificate, it proves that they are too good at acting. Yi Xiangnan's face is a little dark, but he holds back. We didn't bring it today. We will come in the afternoon. The principal smiles appropriately. Okay, before 5:00 is fine. Yi Xiangnan then leaves with the adult and the child. When sitting in the car, he calls Secretary Lee and asks why she doesn't tell him such an important thing. Secretary Lee is quite innocent. Mr. Yi, I thought you could persuade the principal. How can I persuade him? He said he must. Yi Xiangnan lets out a long breath. Inform Lawyer Chin, how soon can I get the marriage certificate? I want it before 4:00 in the afternoon. Secretary Lee's brain is a little blank. After a long time, she asks in a low voice, Mr. Yi, who are you going to marry? Besides Su Mu, who else? Lawyer Chin. Yi Xiangnan's tone wasn't very pleasant. If the director found out about his violent side, he probably wouldn't dare to accept Cymbidium Chinense anymore. Secretary Lee swallowed his saliva. CEO Yi, I can make an appointment with Lawyer Chin, but you have to talk to Miss Su first. Otherwise, I'm afraid you will be embarrassed. Yi Xiangnan hung up the phone. In fact, the two in the back seat had heard the conversation just now. Cymbidium Chinense did not reply. Su Mu said directly, I don't want to get married. Then my son can't go to the best school and receive the best education. Yi Xiangnan's voice was indifferent. Su Mu frowned. It doesn't have to be here. Weren't there other options? Yi Xiannan's voice was cold. Didn't you hear what the principal said? All the high-end nurseries want this. What are you afraid of? It's just a certificate. It's not like you're selling your entire body for a deed. Su Mu was a little hesitant. After all, she really didn't want to have anything to do with Yi Xiangnan. She pursed her lips and then looked at Cymbidium Chinense. Cymbidium Chinense looked at her eagerly. She sighed, Cymbidium Chinense, do you like this nursery very much? Cymbidium Chinense whispered, Mom, can I tell you the truth? Of course. Su Mu felt sorry for him. Cymbidium Chinense said excitedly, Mom, the house here is so beautiful, and the teachers here are very nice. They are very gentle, just like Mom. Finally, he said with some embarrassment, of course, they are not as good as Mom. Yi Xiangnan looked at Su Mu. Su Mu looked down, if you can get it today, go and get it. Mr. Yi, when did you find a girlfriend? I don't have any problem here. Oh, she really dared to say it. Chapter 49-61. Yi Xiangnan sneered. I have no problem with that. Then, he called Lawyer Chin directly. Lawyer Chin was quite surprised. Didn't they just cancel the engagement and now they're getting married again? That was fast. It wasn't good for young people to be so half-hearted. Lawyer Chin hung up and glanced at his beloved disciple. Shen Wenxuan was leaving Stars Entertainment at the end of the month and was in the handover stage. He looked at Lawyer Chin and asked softly, what's the matter? Lawyer Chin sighed. Wenxuan, do you want to reconsider? If you haven't changed your mind after I tell you the news, I won't stop you. Shen Wenxuan's expression changed. He had guessed it. Lawyer Chin patted his shoulder and smiled comfortingly. CEO Yi is going to get married to Miss Su. Yes, the Miss Su you're thinking about, Su Mu. Shen Wenxuan clenched his fists and walked to the window, looking outside. After a long time, he suppressed his voice. Why are they getting married all of a sudden? Lawyer Chin was helpless. Young people change their minds quickly. It must be because of the Cymbidium Chinense. Such a cute kid probably doesn't want his child to be wronged. Shen Wenxuan's slender fingers touched the blinds and he murmured, yes, he won't be wronged. Lawyer Chin walked over and patted his shoulder again. I still have something to do. I have to talk to CEO and Madam about it. It's not a small matter. After all, it concerns the future of Stars Entertainment. Wen Xuan, you have to think about it. Don't be impulsive. Wen Xuan turned around and forced a smile. I know. Lawyer Chen had something important to do, so he left quickly. He asked someone from the Civil Affairs Bureau to handle it and informed Yi Mubai and Wen Yuan about the situation. The Yi family was surprised too. Wen Yuan hung up and asked if he wanted to go. Yi Mubai put down the newspaper and frowned. Your son is cheating. Why are you going there? Wen Yuan was stunned for a moment. What do you mean by marriage fraud? Yi Mubai, explain it clearly. Yi Mubai looked at his wife as if he was looking at an idiot. He folded the newspaper and said slowly, you still can't tell. It's just a nursery. It's so difficult to enter the nursery. You want a marriage certificate. Believe it or not, your son can think of a way to pick the moon. Now he's stumped by a marriage certificate? I think he's just not convinced. He's just not convinced that he can't handle Su Mu. He's even more afraid that his child's mother will run off to marry someone else. He's using a certificate to tie her down. This is just the first step. There's more to come. Wen Yuan simply couldn't believe it. After a while, he said, is Xiangnan that bad? It'll only be worse than I thought. Men understand men the best. Besides, I'm his old man, so I know exactly how many guts he has. Only you women will be fooled by this little trick. Yi Xiannan snorted softly. Wen Yuan was still in shock. He still couldn't believe that his son was so unscrupulous. She asked, then why didn't he use this trick on Yi Huan? Probably because he knows that Yi Huan's heart is with Ting. Don't be fooled by his cold appearance. Most of it is to help Ting and Yi Huan be together. It's also because of a man's pride. Yi Mubai smiled. Su Mu is different. Even if she likes someone else, she has been owned by Xiangnan. How can he let others touch his things? Chapter 49-62. Memorize. After Yi Mubai finished speaking, Wen Yuan looked at him strangely. Yi Mubai, why are you looking at me, madam? Wen Yuan narrowed his eyes. Did you have the same thoughts when you married me? I remember that you liked Lin Cece. She liked Gu Zhe, so you settled for the next best thing. Shadow Emperor Yi was speechless. Then why did I settle for you instead of someone else? Because I have children. Wen Yuan quickly said, others didn't, but I was in the same situation as Su Mu. Yi Mubai was speechless. After a long while, he let out a long sigh, so the men of the Yi clan are all scum in your heart. Wen Yuan, do you dare to say that you haven't been happy all these years? Wen Yuan grinned. Yi Mulin isn't a scumbag, and my adorable grandson definitely isn't a scumbag either. That kid takes after Su Mu. You can tell at a glance. Yi Mubai snorted, thinking about your ex-husband, right? Are you saying that Xiangnan's scum is like me? He looked like he was going to punish her, but Wen Yuan stopped him. Okay, it's just a joke. You're already grandparents. Yi Mubai, on the other hand, was genuinely moved. He hugged his wife and said rather sentimentally, yes, when we become grandparents, I'll be yours in the future. Wen Yuan was speechless. He was already so old, but he still didn't find it disgusting. Yi Mubai was very dissatisfied because she didn't respond to him. Say you'll be mine in the future. Wen Yuan rolled his eyes and patted him. You should keep in touch with Lawyer Chin. At least show some concern for our son. Even though he's a bit of a scumbag, he's still our son. Yi Mubai looked at his wife and was speechless. Was there such a mother? Yes. Wen Yuan was one such person. Starlight Headquarters. Legal team. Shen Wenxuan had been standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, so he could clearly see Yi Xiangnan's car driving in. Because he was the only Bentley in the company, many executives could not afford it, but they did not want to collide with CEO Ye's car. He watched quietly as he got out of the car, and then Su Mu and Cymbidium Chinense got out from the back. The three of them walked together in harmony. Su Mu wanted to get a certificate with Yi Xiangnan instead of getting married. He could also think of the reason, and he also knew that it might be Yi Xiangnan's intention. Such a strong man must do whatever he wants to do, and whatever he wants to get, he must get. And Shen Wenxuan was powerless to stop it. It was not about power, but about standpoint. Su Mu and that person had a child, but he only had a memory and Su Mu's vague unforgettable impression of him. In contrast, this intangible thing seemed especially pale in comparison. Self-awareness was a good thing, and Shen Wenxuan had it. No matter how bitter it was, he could only watch from here, powerless to stop everything. He watched quietly until he couldn't see them anymore. He knew that in a few hours, they would become legally married. In the lobby of the Starlight Building, the receptionist looked at this scene with a smile. The news had already spread, saying that CEO Yi was getting married and was about to get their certificate, the kind that couldn't wait for a moment. How impatient! At first, she didn't know who it was, but upon a closer look, it was Miss Su. That Lin Lu thought that she was very beautiful and especially good at doing things, but what was the use of that? The receptionist looked at Su Mu with envy. Indeed, a child was a king. Chapter 49-63. Su Mu didn't feel anything. In her mind, it was just a matter of getting a certificate. Nothing else would change. She still lived there, and when Yuan was still taking care of Cymbidium Chinense. As for Yi Xiangnan's private life, he could do whatever he wanted. She was still thinking about changing the certificate to green. After all, it wasn't good for two unrelated people to have a certificate. She didn't want to be associated with Yi Xiangnan, and she didn't like people who didn't know her calling her Mrs. Yi. Of course, Su Mu didn't think of Shen Wenxuan. She had experienced too much. Even if she still had a good impression of Shen Wenxuan, it couldn't beat the reality. The most important person to her at this time was Cymbidium Chinense. She thought that she didn't need to report to anyone to explain, so she didn't want to tell him. She didn't expect that Shen Wenxuan already knew. Su Mu got into the elevator. There were only 3 of them in the elevator, and Secretary Li came down to welcome them. Secretary Li's face was full of happiness. After all, she had completed all the tasks assigned by CEO Yi. Moreover, she heard from the finance department that her bonus this month was really generous. It was a 6-figure bonus. Just thinking about it made her feel especially good. The elevator stopped at the 18th floor. The door opened, and Lawyer Qin was standing outside. And Shen Wenxuan. Shen Wenxuan looked at Su Mu, and so did Su Mu. Their eyes met. It was actually quite calm, but in the eyes of the other 2 adults, it was full of adultery. Su Mu pursed her lips and nodded to Lawyer Qin. Lawyer Qin also felt that this pair of children was quite cruel. He didn't know what method Xiangnan had used to break them up. Well, now it was time for the visa. CEO Yi won. He was really resourceful. He turned his head and said, "Wenxuan, deal with what happened just now. We'll discuss it later when I come back." Shen Wenxuan nodded calmly and took a step back. From the beginning to the end, his eyes were on Su Mu's face. Lawyer Qin thought to himself, this is really cruel. Yi Xiangnan, on the other hand, was expressionless. Cymbidium Chinense called him Uncle Shin. At such a young age, he had already learned to observe. He felt that Uncle Shen was very unhappy, like a lovelorn on TV. He liked Uncle Shen very much, but he didn't know why he had become like this. In any case, the elevator door closed. There was one more person in the elevator. Yi Xiangnan and Lawyer Qin were discussing the signing of the contract. It was quite simple. When they arrived at the top floor, Secretary Li said, "Boss Yi, Miss Su, the staff is already waiting in the small conference room. This way, please." They went in together, and Cymbidium Chinense was taken away by Secretary Li. In this kind of situation, it seemed a little inappropriate for a young child to be there. He couldn't escape the feeling of getting on the bus first and then paying the ticket later. After entering and exchanging a few pleasantries, the staff took out 2 blank pieces of paper for them to sign and even took a photo. Today's clothes were all suitable. When they were taking photos, the staff kept asking them to stand closer. Later, he also said that Sumu didn't manage her expression well. Sumu was also quite helpless. It only took her a few seconds to sign, but it took her half an hour to finish the photos. She didn't know why Yi Xiangnan was so picky. Anyway, it was not true. Seeing that she was impatient, Yi Xiangnan squinted at her and said, "This is the first time I get married. It's just a certificate." Sumu couldn't help reminding him. The staff smiled and said, "Mrs. Yi, this is legally binding." Chapter 49-64. Sumu glanced at the staff member, and the staff member smiled. Sumu pursed her lips. "I know it's legally binding. Otherwise, couldn't she just buy one from a scalper on the street?" Thinking of this, she looked at Yi Xiangnan and coughed. "Why don't we buy one?" Yi Xiangnan frowned. "You mean, fake certificate?" Sumu nodded. "Fake certificate." Yi Xiangnan was speechless. He looked at the staff member who was trying to hold back his laughter. "You're saying this in front of them? And if word gets out, where will I put my face?" The dignified CEO of Stars Entertainment couldn't even get a marriage certificate, let alone fake one. He glanced at Sumu. Sumu didn't say anything. It was the last time they took a photo together. The staff member took the photo and showed it to them. He smiled. Although the smile is a little fake, at least it's a smile. Yi Xiangnan looked at Sumu. Sumu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. In the photo, it was as the staff member said, the smile was a little fake. But no matter what, at 2:00 in the afternoon, the 2 newly made marriage certificates came out. They were steaming hot, and there was a faint smell of ink. The staff member sent them over personally. When he handed them over, he gave them quite a sincere blessing. Sumu felt a little depressed. Yi Xiangnan asked Secretary Li to wrap 2 big red packets for the staff member to shut his mouth. In addition, he also sent wedding candies internally. All of Stars Entertainment knew that CEO Yi had gotten his certificate. But Sumu didn't know. She thought that everything was still the same as before. In the afternoon, she and Yi Xiannan went to the nursery again, and the head of the nursery received them warmly. Yi Xiangnan took out the marriage certificate proudly. From now on, he was also a person with a certificate. The director smiled and accepted the tuition fee. Then he looked at Cymbidium Chinense. "Cymbidium Chinense, do you want to experience it today or do you want to go to class tomorrow?" Yi Xiangnan touched his son's head. "You decide." Cymbidium Chinense looked at him eagerly. It was obvious. But Yi Xiangnan found that his son was a little. He didn't know where he got his personality from. He patted his son and smiled. Go, your mom and I will pick you up after school. We will take you to have a children's meal tonight to celebrate. Cymbidium chinense was still young. To celebrate you and mom getting your certificate today. The director and the teacher looked at each other. They thought to themselves that CEO Yi had really done a lot for the child. Cymbidium chinense didn't know about this. He was happily held by the teacher and went to class. Yi Xiangnan and Sumu watched their son leave. After a while, they exchanged some pleasantries with the director. Then, they went out with Sumu to find a coffee shop. Sumu thought that they were just waiting for Cymbidium chinense to finish class. She didn't expect that Yi Xiangnan would go to the car and take out a laptop. He was drinking coffee while looking at the plan. He was quite focused. He wasn't just playing games. Sumu was a little bored. She took out her phone and played. It was rare for her to be so free. After a while, Yi Xiangnan looked at her and realized that she was playing Gamoku. He said with some disdain, "This is for old people." "Sumu, you're playing this." Sumu bit her lower lip. "Is there something wrong with that? Or are there rules?" "There are no rules. But you are behind the times," Yi Xiangnan said and took her phone. He lowered his head and opened an app. Stars has just developed a new game. I'll help you download it. I'll get someone to give you the best equipment. Chapter 4965. He made a call as he downloaded it. Sumu said softly, "I don't know how to play. I'll teach you." After he finished the call, the phone was also downloaded. Then, CEO Yi was dissatisfied. "This phone is too old. How can I play games? Get a new one." Sumu let out an "aw." He dialed another number. In less than 10 minutes, a staff of the store came over and took several latest mobile phones. "Mr. Yi, these are the latest models, and the configurations are all the best. Mrs. Yi, you can see which one you like." Before Sumu could say anything, Yi Xiangnan said, "Stay here. Go to Stars Entertainment and get the check from my secretary." The employee thanked him and left. Sumu looked at the boxes on the table, speechless. She didn't like it. It was convenient and she could get whatever she wanted. But she didn't deserve it. Yi Xiangnan lowered her gaze and looked at the cell phones. She smiled faintly. "Which one do you like?" Sumu bit her lip. "I don't want it." Yi Xiangnan looked at the cell phones on the table, picked up a box, and opened it. Then, she removed her card and put it inside. He opened it and downloaded some necessary software for her. Then, he started the game. It was so fun to be a RMB player. Sumu felt good watching from the side. Yi Xiangnan seemed to have forgotten that he still had a lot of work to do. Sumu reminded him softly, "Aren't you working?" Yi Xiangnan glanced at her and said calmly, "About that, we'll talk about it tomorrow." With that, he continued to play. Sumu was speechless. Did he download the game for her or did he want to play it himself? Because he was a RMB player, he actually cleared the game after 2 hours. Yi Xiangnan tossed the phone back to her and said somewhat disinterestedly, "It's too simple." Sumu was even more speechless. She took the phone and wanted to exchange the card back. She didn't want to accept anything from him, but Yi Xiangnan threw her old phone into the trash can. "Sumu, well, this is your compensation, and these are interest," he said, pushing 2 more boxes to her, keeping the elegant black one for himself. Sumu found it rather strange. Yi Xiangnan raised his hand and looked at his watch. "Cymbidium chinense class is over. Let's pick him up." Sumu followed him and walked to the entrance of the nursery. The children came out in groups. They were very neat, and their little faces were very cute. Perhaps it was because their genes were better, but it actually felt like they were all the same. Yi Xiangnan and Sumu stood side by side, waiting for Cymbidium chinense to come out. This feeling was quite strange, and neither of them had experienced it before. Cymbidium chinense class was the last to come out. Cymbidium chinense was especially happy the moment he came out, and he jumped up and down. Daddy, Mommy. The two of them were waiting, but he still chose to jump into his mother's arms. Yi Xiangnan looked at him for a long time and dragged him out. Alright, you're a big boy now. You can't stick to Mommy all day long. Cymbidium chinense said a little squeamishly, I just stuck to you for a while. Yi Xiangnan glared at him. Cymbidium chinense was a little unhappy. Sumu glanced at Yi Xiangnan, and then carried Cymbidium chinense up. She comforted her son gently. After a while, Cymbidium chinense came down obediently. His little face was red as he held Sumu's hand with one hand and held Yi Xiangnan's hand with the other. Yi Xiangnan was a little speechless. Why is this kid so obedient to you? He doesn't listen to me and even talks back to me. Chapter 49-66. Memorize, because you don't have any prestige, and you don't set an example. Sumu snorted. By this time, they had already reached the car. Yi Xiangnan opened the door and said, How am I not respected? Everyone in Stars Entertainment is afraid of me. That doesn't count. Sumu looked down. I'm not really convinced. Yi Xiangnan sat in the car and adjusted his seatbelt. His eyes landed on the rearview mirror and he said calmly, How do you know that I don't really believe you? Sumu, in your heart, I just accidentally hugged you twice and that's it. He didn't care that his son was in the car and coughed lightly. If I didn't hug you, then I wouldn't be human. Sumu was so embarrassed that she wished she could get out of the car. As for Cymbidium chinense, it was still young, so it only understood half of it. Yi Xiangnan started the car. Originally, Sumu thought that he would go to a cheap restaurant. After all, it was a place for children's meals, and it wouldn't be very luxurious. However, he actually chose a top-notch French restaurant. To be honest, Sumu had never been to such a place, and she didn't really like such a place. Yi Xiangnan stopped the car and let her and Cymbidium chinense go in first. Sumu was stopped at the door. Because she was dressed plainly, and this restaurant was particular about evening gowns. The doorman said in a very reserved tone, I'm sorry, madam, we are a membership here. The so-called membership system was to deposit a certain amount of money in advance before being able to enter the restaurant to eat. The minimum deposit for this restaurant was 1 million, and for a VIP, it would start at 5 million. For a customer of Yi Xiangnan's level, it would normally start at 10 million. It was normal for a meal here to cost tens of thousands. If a high-class banquet was held, it would also be normal for a meal to cost more than 1 million. It was impossible for ordinary people to eat here. Sumu was stunned. Cymbidium chinense reminded her softly, Mom, say Dad's name. Sumu nodded. I was invited by Mr. Yi Xiangnan. He's parking his car. Yi Xiangnan. The doorman's expression changed slightly as he looked at Sumu and Cymbidium chinense. The child was dressed very well, but the lady was very ordinary. The doorman obviously didn't believe it. He thought for a while, let's invite Mr. Yi to come here and then go in together. Sumu was embarrassed. At this time, a few more guests came and went. One of them was an old acquaintance, Lin Lu. Lin Lu had probably just returned from abroad and had come to Starlight's headquarters to report on her work. She had arranged to have a meal here with her friends, but she didn't expect to meet Sumu. Moreover, it was such a high-end French restaurant. Other than Yi Xiangnan bringing her here, there was no other possibility. A touch of evil flashed through Lin Lu's eyes. She directly ignored Sumu and said the name of Yi Xiangnan. The doorman looked at Sumu and then at Lin Lu. Because Lin Lu and Mr. Yi had been here, he let Lin Lu in. All of this happened in front of Sumu and Cymbidium Chinense. Cymbidium Chinense was hurt. Sumu squatted down and said softly, "Let's not eat here, okay?" Cymbidium Chinense agreed. It was in a good mood, but now it was very depressed. It remembered the things it had forgotten before. At this time, Yi Xiangnan came over and looked at them. "Why don't you go in?" The doorman knew that he had made a mistake when he saw her. This turned out to be the real Mrs. Yi. It was said that she had given birth to a child for Mr. Yi. The manager also came over. Seeing this scene, he asked what was going on. Chapter 49-67. The manager also came over. Seeing this scene, he asked what was going on. Because the membership card could only be used once, it was impossible to open 2 tables at the same time, so the doorman told him the truth. Yi Xiangnan frowned. He knew that Lin Lu had returned to China these 2 days, but he didn't expect that she would come here again. He had brought her here for dinner once, but she didn't have a card. She used his name to pay directly, which seemed too intimate. He had never been intimate with any woman to this extent. So he was unhappy. Sumu wanted to change a place to eat, so he said directly, "Put Manager Lin's meal on Stars Entertainment's bill, and let Manager Lin pay the bill himself. As for my membership card, don't give it to irrelevant people, except for my wife." He turned his body and gestured to Sumu. The manager was especially angry. Was this doorman blind? Such a child looked exactly like CEO Yi. That Lin Lu was just a department manager, one of CEO Ye's women. How could he let her in? The manager smiled and welcomed them in. Sumu was extremely unwilling at first, and she didn't want to show any sense of superiority in front of Lin Lu. After entering, the arranged seats were also close to each other. It was really fucking dog. Sumu sat down and didn't say anything. Cymbidium Chinense's face was even tighter. After ordering, Yi Xiangnan insisted on the aperitif and smiled. "It's not a big deal. Didn't I make my position clear? Why are you angry?" "I'm not angry, and I have no right to be angry." Sumu said lightly, "We don't need such occasions in the future. As Mrs. Yi, you have to adapt to such occasions." Yi Xiangnan said lightly, "Well, stop it. The whole restaurant is looking at us." Sumu didn't say anything, neither did Cymbidium Chinense. They just looked very unhappy. Lin Lu was sitting on the opposite seat. At this time, the manager personally went over to explain that her expenses could not be charged to CEO Ye's membership card. The bill would be sent to Stars Entertainment and she would have to pay for it herself. Lin Lu came over with her friends. She was treating them. This meal cost at least 100,000 yuan. Heartache was a small matter, but it was very embarrassing. Lin Lu didn't know that after she separated from Yi Xiangnan, she couldn't eat a single French meal. However, she knew in her heart that she couldn't lose her temper on such an occasion. She didn't dare to show any displeasure to Yi Xiangnan, so she raised her glass and gave a toast to Yi Xiangnan. She knew that the fact that she was able to sit here without being asked to apply for a membership was already due to Yi Xiangnan. Yi Xiangnan didn't pay much attention to her and just nodded. He turned around and said to Sumu, "You see, Lin Lu is quite decent. In the future, don't make a fuss over such a small matter." "No." Sumu pursed her lips, "I'm not related to Mr. Yi." He laughed. "I think we're on the same marriage certificate." After saying that, Yi Xiangnan stared at Sumu. Suddenly, Sumu felt that something was wrong. They just got a certificate, but the phone call in the afternoon, playing games, and now the French meal. When she was thinking, Yi Xiangnan had said again, "I was a little cold to you before, so, we were very good together in the afternoon. We need to get used to each other. We can't say that we will be very happy in the future, but it should not be difficult to be ordinary." In his opinion, Sumu should be satisfied with his little love. After all, he was also very clear about how many women longed for and yearned for him. In normal times, a woman like Sumu couldn't enter his eyes at all, let alone lie with him. She should be satisfied. Chapter 49-68. Memorize. But now, Sumu was obviously not giving him face. His coaxing didn't work at all. Yi Xiangnan didn't look too good, but he didn't do anything because he was in a high-class restaurant and Cymbidium Chinense was beside him. It was just that they weren't very happy. The French dishes were served very quickly. Although the Cymbidium Chinense was small, it seemed to have some kind of innate gene flowing in its blood. When it ate, it actually looked good, and it learned quickly. Fortunately, Sumu had taken this etiquette class in college, so she didn't embarrass herself too much. However, she barely passed. On the other hand, Lin Lu, who had lost face, was even more graceful and charming at this moment. Yi Xiangnan didn't pay much attention to her. After all, he had seen many women like Lin Lu. He didn't really care about them, especially if they weren't stunning. Such women have a common problem, that is, they feel that they are very special, and want to occupy a place in the heart of a man. In fact, they are really very ordinary. Lin Lu was a little disappointed. She thought that in front of the ordinary Sumu, CEO Yi could see her good side, but CEO Yi didn't mean it at all. Of course, Yi Xiangnan didn't mean that. A powerful man like him could get any woman he wanted. Lin Lu was also used by him to relieve his boredom when he was in a bad mood. Now that he was so unhappy with Sumu, he naturally didn't have the mood to relieve his boredom. Between the child's mother and another woman, he still had to weigh the pros and cons. At the very least, he would not embarrass Sumu in front of her. After the meal, he actually didn't take Lin Lu seriously. When he left, he signed the bill and left with Cymbidium Chinense and Sumu. He didn't even look at Lin Lu. Lin Lu pursed her lips, and there was a hint of jealousy in her eyes. The woman in front of her is her best friend. Knowing that she is in a bad mood, she comforts. Sumu is so ordinary. How can CEO Yi spend the rest of his life with such an ordinary woman? Don't worry. Lin Lu uses the fork to pick up the food on the plate, and her voice is indifferent. What if I am one of the many women around him? The woman widened her eyes. You're not thinking of becoming Mrs. Yi, are you? Lin Lu, I won't advise you against other things, but don't even think about it. Look at how old that child is. I can see how much CEO Yi dotes on him. He even married such an ordinary wife for the sake of this child. Lin Lu, as a bystander, I can see it clearly. CEO Yi might be playing outside, but it's unlikely that he will divorce and remarry. Have you seen anyone in the Yi family changing wives? Lin Lu is unwilling, and she lets out a long sigh. Listen to me. Don't take things too hard. With your qualifications, you can't find any man. Why bother being entangled with a married man? The woman tried to persuade her again. Lin Lu's voice was very soft. If he marries Qin Huan, I won't have any feelings. Lin voice, and up, if he marries Yi Qin Huan Mu, I Qin, why? Lin Lu is unwilling, and she is not convinced. She is much better than Su Mu in terms of appearance, knowledge, and other aspects. Why can he marry Su Mu, but not me? That woman lets out a long sigh, can't you see? Su Mu is an exception, and no one can replicate this exception. Lin Lu doesn't say anything. She lost because she didn't have a child. Su Mu, on the other hand, got pregnant without a word and gave birth without a word. This woman's shrewdness was truly deep. Chapter 49-69. Memorize. Lin Lu gritted her teeth in hatred. On the other side, Su Mu's mood wasn't very good either. After all, after that incident, she couldn't look Lin Lu in the eye. Even if she didn't have any feelings for Yi Xiangnan, she didn't want to see his other women. After getting into the car, Su Mu didn't say anything. Since she didn't say anything, Yi Xiangnan drove the car directly to his villa. He even specially called Wen Yuan and told him that Cymbidium Chinense was staying at his place today. After he hung up, Su Mu woke up and looked at him. Yi Xiangnan smiled. I asked you if you'd like to sleep here, and you said yes. Su Mu patted the window. I want to go back. Yi Xiangnan's voice was a little lazy. Are you going to quarrel with me in front of Cymbidium Chinense? Hearing his words, Su Mu became more rational. She sat in the car and looked at the building in front of her. To her, this place did not have any good memories. Instead, she left in a sorry state. Su Mu lowered her eyes. I'll stay in the Cymbidium Chinense for one night, but I still have to go back. Mr. Yi, we've agreed that we'll just get the marriage certificate and nothing else will change. Yi Xiangnan placed both hands on the steering wheel and looked at the Cymbidium Chinense in the back. He raised his chin and said, Cymbidium Chinense, you go in and look for Granny Chen first. Cymbidium Chinense responded with an "oh," but it did not move and continued to look at them. He looked worried. After all, it was his parents' quarrel. It was impossible for him to be indifferent. Previously, he was very angry with his father, but after all, he was still a child. As long as the adults treated him a little better, his heart would immediately soften. This was what cute baby was like. He didn't move. Yi Xiangnan looked at him and said quite seriously, I won't bully your mother. Cymbidium Chinense was a little worried. Dad, you promise? Yi Xiangnan nodded. Okay, I promise. Cymbidium Chinense was relieved and got out of the car. Su Mu did not move. After closing the car door, Yi Xiangnan made sure that the Cymbidium Chinense had entered the hall. He locked the car door from the inside. This was an old trick of his. Su Mu didn't believe that he would dare to do anything to her in front of her house. She wasn't in a hurry and just looked at him calmly. Looks like you're not afraid of me at all. Yi Xiangnan rubbed his chin and smiled meaningfully. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. He did not like women to have a temper, but it seemed that there was no point in blindly pleasing him. Su Mu's behavior was quite interesting. She ignored him and refused to give in to him. In the past, he thought she was putting on an act, but after what happened with Shen Wenxuan, he realized that she really had no feelings for him. She didn't take him seriously at all. On the contrary, she liked Shen Wenxuan, who was not very good. Of course, he had to admit that Shen Wenxuan was excellent, but so what? Compared with him, Yi Xiangnan, he was destined to be ordinary. In a place like B City, a little money didn't make one rich. The Yi family and the Wen family had deep roots and were the ones that socialites desperately wanted to marry into. Of course, there was also the Qin family and the Tang family. In recent years, most of the Tang family's business was abroad, and the domestic market was almost monopolized by the Qin family. Of course, there was no need to mention Shenting. If he married Qin Yi Huan, Qin Xian would become a bachelor, but it was very likely that he would be trapped by Baianin. Then, the Yi family and the Qin family would be in-laws. This was the combination of the strong, the unchanging principle of the upper class and the circle that many people couldn't squeeze into. And Sumu didn't care about these at all. In her eyes and heart, there was only her first love in college. Chapter 49-70. Yi Xiangnan was a little curious. How talented was Shen Wenchuan back then for Sumu to be so infatuated with him? After so many years, she still couldn't forget about him even after having a child. Would she be as good as him? He was the one who had hugged her. Wasn't it said that women were especially obsessed with their first man? Or was she not satisfied with him? Just thinking about it made Yi Xiangnan's expression turn a little ugly. He felt the need to clear his name. He was used to being domineering, especially to a little invisible person like Sumu. He didn't need to be polite. He tilted his head. Stay. I'll make you satisfied. Sumu was stunned for a while before she understood what he meant. She suddenly felt her mouth go dry and licked her lips. What do you mean? There was an indescribable look in Yi Xiangnan's eyes. It's exactly what you're thinking. Yi Xiangnan, you're shameless. She swung her hand and was about to hit him, but he caught her. Hit me again. He stared at her face. Sumu, why are you unhappy with me? He let go of her and sat up straighter. Looking ahead, he said softly, I'll do my duty as a husband and give you everything, including the self-esteem you want. Sumu, don't say that you don't care about this. Wasn't that why you ran away from home with Cymbidium Chinense the last time? I really don't know why you care so much. You're my wife. Who can look down on you? Just stay at home or play mahjong with a few wives. You don't have to work so hard. Just listen to what my mother said. Don't take it seriously. Didn't she also ask for a job in the past? Now, isn't she still playing mahjong and drinking tea? That's the life of a rich woman. Sumu looked away and looked out of the window. That's not what I want, and it's not what I can get. He was probably used to the people around him being like this. Whether it was his mother or Baianin's mother, they all had very strong backgrounds. They had lived like this since they were young, and their husbands treated them very well after they got married. As for Sumu, what did she have? She had nothing. How could he have the right to enjoy peace and comfort? Sumu understood that the Cymbidium Chinense no longer belonged to her, and she only had herself. That was why she was clear-headed enough to know what she wanted. What Yi Xiangnan meant by giving was not forever. But, alms. In other words, she was an accessory of the Cymbidium Chinense. A mother's value depended on her son's value, so how could she be valuable? Yi Xiangnan is tired of the novelty. It will be embarrassing for her to be Mrs. Yi. Can she let Wen Yuan protect her all the time? Sumu smiles lightly. Thank you for your appreciation, Mr. Yi, but I still want to rely on myself. Rely on yourself? Yi Xiangnan sneers. Do you think it's easy to rely on yourself? You majored in media. Do you think you can be a paparazzi without a certain relationship? He squints at her, or be killed by others. Sumu breathes out a long sigh. You think too much, Mr. Yi. Yi Xiangnan is still cold. Sumu, you have to pay the price for being outstanding. Just look at Bai Ainan's identity. Do you know what she has experienced? She was sent blood clothes, made threatening phone calls, and almost kidnapped. Sumu, are you sure you want to do this or find a unit to eat and wait for death? Saying that, he smiles. Most people are playful. I think you are probably the same. You think it's a career when you find a job, and then you have the confidence to challenge men. In fact, it's not necessary. The Yi family doesn't lack the salary. As long as you take good care of the Cymbidium Chinense, you can have everything. As long as you don't cross the line, I don't think we will divorce. We will have a daughter in 2 years, okay? Chapter 49-71. 69 books. Sumu was silent for a long time, and then she smiled faintly. Thank you for your love, Mr. Yi. I'm really not interested in such a life. If I'm just hanging around outside, I'm no different from a nanny in Ye's family. She also had an ideal. Even in the most difficult days with Cymbidium Chinense, she didn't give up. She thought that one day Cymbidium Chinense would grow up and be able to take care of herself. She could do what she wanted and live the life she wanted. Yi Xiangnan's face was dark. He felt that he had coaxed her well today. But she was really unmoved by force or persuasion. He ran out of patience and frowned. What else are you dissatisfied with? Sumu didn't answer this question. Yi Xiangnan thought for a while and smiled. Are you still waiting for Shen Wenxuan? Just give up. I advise you, Sumu, that we've already gotten our marriage certificate. You're now my legal wife. Do you think I'll just give you to someone else? Sumu felt that he was really unreasonable, and at the same time, she understood his conspiracy. Today's matter was a two-man show performed by him and Secretary Li from the beginning to the end. Secretary Li was really good. Sumu endured it. I stayed here for one night because I wanted to comfort Xiangnan. Sleep at my place. Mr. Ye's voice was hoarse. Today we got the certificate, and we have to celebrate. Sumu ignored him directly and patted the window, opened the door. Seeing that she didn't want to leave, Yi Xiangnan smiled and opened the door to let her get out. Sumu entered the hall. Aunt Chen was also a smart person. She had already got the news that Mr. Yi and Mrs. Yi had got the certificate, so she went forward to call Mrs. Yi. Sumu felt uncomfortable. Just call me Miss Su. Mr. Yi and I are still the same as before. With Auntie Wang as an example, Auntie Chen was especially careful. She smiled and said, how can it be the same? It's not the same. Madam is now Sir's sweetheart. In the future, please guide us more, Madam. In addition to Auntie Chen, there were 2 more talkative people in the villa. They must have been trained and sent here by Wen Yuan. They followed Auntie Chen and said good things about Sumu politely, almost praising her to the heavens. Sumu even suspected that she had seen wrongly. She was indeed a peerless beauty, but even if she had heard these flattering words, she couldn't take them seriously. How could she not know what she looked like after so many years? Anyway, she didn't have to deal with them in the future, so she just responded with a few words and wanted to take her son upstairs. At this time, Yi Xiangnan came in. He looked in Sumu's direction and smiled meaningfully. It was true that the feeling of being flattered was very good. No one was disgusted, but Sumu was very clear. If Yi Xiangnan thought highly of her, these people would flatter her. If Yi Xiangnan didn't want to see her, she would have nothing. She took Cymbidium Chinense upstairs. Cymbidium Chinense was a little uneasy at first, but Sumu took care of him, bathed him, slept him, and told him stories as usual. He hadn't been with his mother for 2 days and missed her very much. He couldn't bear to sleep, so he forced his eyes open and looked at her, asking her to tell him more stories. Sumu was a little sad. She also wanted to be with her son, but Sumu had a problem. She had to do what she wanted to do. Just like back then, she wanted to give birth to Cymbidium chinense. Her family didn't want it, but she tried her best to give birth. That year was the most miserable year Sumu had ever lived. When she was 8 months pregnant, she was still washing dishes in a small restaurant just to earn money to go to the hospital to give birth to Cymbidium chinense. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.